Is Ghost of Yōtei a genre-defining open-world game that will forever change the face of this corner of video games? No, not really. Is it really great? Fuck yeah. I think I can swear in the first 7 seconds of videos now. I really hope that wasn't misinformation. It feels good not to have to make a video like I did for Ragnarok, even if positive videos never do as well on this website because people are hateful gremlins. The same as I didn't lie about my feelings on Ragnarok just to boost engagement, I genuinely just feel that way. I'm not gonna lie about Yōtei either. I really love this game. It has flaws, and we're going to get into all of it. I have plenty to say, hopefully I can say it concisely, but overall, as a broad sweeping statement you could put into an advertisement tweet where you have all the reviewers saying things about the game in broad strokes, I'd probably say, bloody solid, mate, in my English Australian accent that I have for reasons I shan't explain. If you haven't seen my recent Tsushima retrospective, you don't have to, although knowing my thoughts on that game might help for context with how I approach my criticisms or praise of this game, but it's not essential viewing, I just thought it was a good video. But alright, similarly to Yōtei, let's not waste any time with any more preamble or setup and dive right into the game itself. I said in my Tsushima video that the introduction, the prologue, was pretty much perfect in how it establishes stakes, motivations, the status quo, and the breaking of it, as well as Jin's own history and morals. That's all established so efficiently by the prologue's exploration of the Mongols, the war, Jin's own memories, and his meeting with Yuna. Tsushima takes its time, it wants to invite you in, and it does it on the fly too. It's not bogged down by exposition and long drawn out cutscenes, it has you playing pretty fast while also easing you into things. Yōtei, though, bizarrely, takes a different approach, and I think in its attempt to create a frictionless glide into the attractive open world, it ends up applying unintended friction. The opening to Yōtei is a flashback, a sequence of nicely animated traditional Japanese paintings while Atsu, our protagonist, exposits her journey from the flashback to the present day, and a short gameplay sequence where we fight and kill one of the Yōtei Six, the main antagonists of the game, before another time jump where we return to Eizo, the main open world, and we're hit with the title card. From pressing start new game to the title card drop, it was 23 minutes, and I was playing on lethal, so I died a few times at the start. In Tsushima, it takes around about an hour. There are arguments to be made for getting you into the open world quicker being better, but I think the opening and title card drop of Tsushima will always stick with me more, and I think that comes from the slow burn. You slowly understand Jin, you understand his history, his family, his morals, you learn how to play, the stakes are established, and you're on his side, and then the title card drops. You're in this world and it's time to get going. It feels really good. In Yōtei, it feels rushed and a little unearned, and that was frustrating. It made the opening feel like it lacked confidence in its own story, like it didn't want you to get bored and switch off, so fast-tracked things and dropped you into a world with stuff to do so you'd keep playing, and as an opening, it ended up, for me, doing the opposite of what it wanted. It left a bitter taste in my mouth, which took a few more hours of playing to dissipate. The only part that truly worked for me was writing each of the Yōtei Six's names on the sash Atsu wears for the entire game, the sash she uses to cross off names like Bayek of Siwa does on his own skin, which goes harder, but comparisons aside, this was great. Until they sped it up in case you were getting bored, although it was for the brothers who were sort of a joint package, so I can't hate too hard, it's fine. There's another part of this opening I feel is both unearned and really unsophisticated, and that's the symbolism with which Atsu becomes the ghost, or as this game says more often, Onryo, which I think is an important distinction, but we'll return to that. In Tsushima, we get a really powerful piece of symbolism as Jin's armor breaks and he's left seemingly dead on the beach with his sword planted beside him like a memorial. This moment where he wakes is a symbol of the samurai becoming the ghost. It's not said aloud, and it's left to simply be this moment of impact that becomes legend as the game unfolds. But in Yōtei, we get, at first, Atsu expositing that the Night of the Burning Tree was the moment she personally believed she became an Onryo, like her mother used to tell her about, and then later, after you kill the snake, Atsu is also stabbed at the same time, but she wakes, similar to the scene with Jin, in fire and destruction, and this time a passerby decides to exclaim out loud, I guess she's some kind of ghost of Yōtei. It's fucking lame. Atsu gets this moment of death and rebirth twice, and both times there's someone's voice to tell the player, look, this is when she became a ghost. Do you see the symbolism that is happening in front of your eyes? Whereas in Tsushima, it's just left to be symbolism, and that works better artistically. And so, I don't really have much praise for the opening of the game. I think you could easily fix it by removing the exposition cutscene, because it's all information you pick up as you play anyway, and remove the random passerby calling her a ghost out loud. If I were to restructure the intro, I think I'd begin with her writing the names on the sash with absolutely no context. Then you head to kill the snake, and you're left wondering, what happened? Who is this guy? Why are we killing him? And then when the title card drops, it does so with an air of pure mystery. You then head to your family home and begin learning about Atsu and her past, and over the course of the Grasslands area, we begin to truly understand her journey and goals. But with what we have, it left me, like I said, for hours, feeling a little deflated. I was so worried that the game was going to suck, and the whole thing was going to be shallow and dumb. But it wasn't long before it roped me back in, and while the journey would consist of many ups and downs, it ultimately won me over. It is funny how the game exposits so much on you at the start, because as you explore and roam around, the more you see and the more people you speak to, the bigger a picture you get of Atsu, the Yōtei Six, Saito's gang, and the Matsumai clan who rule Eizo. They literally didn't need to exposit because the world very carefully tells you its story as you explore. And explore is the word I'd use, because Yōtei remedies in so many ways the feeling that hit me from the issues I took with Tsushima. There are ways it doesn't, but I think by and large it breaks from the confines of design that felt so smothering and tedious by Act 3 of Tsushima, and I couldn't be more pleased in that regard. The world is structured a little differently to traditional open worlds, and is probably a little closer to Horizon Forbidden West in how it has choke points that funnel you to new areas of the map. You essentially have 6 different I'm trying really hard not to say open zones out of spite. Yōtei has 6 open areas, 3 that are focused and tight in Ishikari Plains, Teshio Ridge, and Oshima Coast, 2 that are large and sprawling and work as transitional areas in Grasslands and Tokachi Range, and 1 area that works as this waiting room that exists at a major crossroads between arcs in the Neoro Wilds. One of the most bizarre parts about this, though, is that from the offset you can venture as far north as possible. Despite having these choke points to control your flow through the world and thereby story, the only part it doesn't let you venture to from the get-go is Oshima Coast. If you want to, you can head all the way up to the north at the very start, and that feels fucking insane to me. I said in my Tsushima video that locking off parts of the map until you've hit certain story progression is good, and often artistically bolsters a narrative by being able to use areas of the map to tie specific beats in a character's journey and make that area, in a focused story game, feel more meaningful when you're able to explore it. For example, heading to Saint Denis at the start of RDR2 completely knocks the wind out of the moment you get there in the story, and so Red Dead Redemption 1 or GTA 4's approach probably would have benefited Red Dead Redemption 2 in that regard, and Yōtei does do this. Areas are linked to story progression, but in letting you choose to go to Teshio Ridge before you've even fully explored the Grasslands, Tokachi Range, or even stepped foot in Ishikari Plains, feels unnecessarily open in a way that only harms the player experience. Grasslands is a sprawling space to explore, and naturally funneling the player towards Ishikari Plains is what the game tries to do, but you can ignore it. And while freedom is cool, I don't think in this instance it's actually to the game's benefit. It only makes the game worse if you decide to head to the furthest away marker first. There is nothing positive gained by giving the player this freedom other than the buzzword, freedom. Sometimes carefully curating progression is better, and so I'm unsure as to why they didn't just make it a little more linear in how you progress, especially when before the game came out they said you can't choose the order in which you tackle the Yōtei Six, which is technically true, but you absolutely can choose the order in which you tackle the first 2 major arcs, and at which point you visit Tokachi Range, and so I think it was a little disingenuous. I will say though that the dialogue does account for your choices here, and so depending on which way you go first, there are aspects of the world that will acknowledge what you've done and in which order, rather than having everything be entirely separated, which is something that plagues games like Far Cry 5 and Assassin's Creed, all of the new ones, to be honest. It's not in major ways though, and the main arcs aren't allowed to interact until Chapter 2 when both have been completed. And if you do Teshio Ridge before Ishikari Plains, it feels insane to befriend the previous Kitsune, then go and learn Jubei is alive, not tell him anything about what just happened in Teshio Ridge, then head home where he learns you've been friends with the Kitsune this whole time. You're obviously meant to do Ishikari first. I have no idea why the game insisted here on non-linearity, because you can simply just have a less cohesive experience for no reason. We'll talk a little more about this later though. I want to explore the areas narratively in a bit in this section about the story, but functionally and structurally, I think the open worlds in this game learn everything they possibly could have and more from Iki Island. I mean, each area is isolated and usually Iki Island sized, other than Teshio Ridge, which is the most Tsushima the game gets, derogatory. And I think having different types of open areas, ones that are a little more focused and specific, contrasted with these large, sprawling ones, creates a sense of variety that keeps things fresh as you move around. going from wandering the grasslands and getting my bearings to a tight and cohesive space like Ishikari Plains, to then venture into another wide open space and Takachi Range before heading into Teshio Ridge just creates a rich sense of diversity, especially with the visual flair for each area being so distinct and specific too. But beyond these things that are ultimately superficial, the means of exploration tries its absolute best to remedy the question mark issue that was so prominent in Tsushima and other games of its ilk. I detail my criticisms in that video, but to lay it out as fast as possible here, a map that you unfog by moving around which is littered with question marks that indicate a point of interest means that everything that isn't a question mark is empty space, and whilst the wind mechanic remedied the staring at UI issue that accompanies most of these types of open world games, the fundamental design philosophy of following a waypoint to a point of interest remained, and so the world, by the end, still felt like a checklist, similar to something we'd see from a modern Ubisoft title, which is just a synonym that I use for bad if you're new here. Yōtei attempts as much as it can to fix this, and it does it with the spyglass. When you enter a new area, you're met with a fogged over map, but this time there are no question marks. You can choose to wander around and simply find things, which in and of itself makes the act of exploration mean more, but you can also pull out your spyglass and mark things you spot in the distance, usually indicated by smoke or interesting trees, just things that look like they might be something in the distance. You can then tag them and head over at your own pace to see what they are. In theory. In practice, you know 87.36% of the time exactly what it is at the location because you marked it and the game told you. You might see a tree and think, ooh, what's that? Instead of creating your own question mark or your own marker to investigate, the spyglass will glow yellow to indicate you found something and then it will tag it. Oh, it's a hot spring. Oh, it's a bamboo strike. I didn't find that out. I didn't tag an interesting looking building or rock formation. The game told me from 300 miles away that it's one of the places worth visiting. So I'm torn here, because while I prefer this to Tsushima, it's really only a matter of steps away from having the same question mark issue that plagued that game too. You survey the map, it tells you automatically what is a thing, you then mop up the markers you've placed, rinse and repeat. It adds a greater sense of exploration because you're the one who placed that marker, but telling you what is at the location before you might know sucks the discoverability out of it. On top of that, it always tells you what you'll get from a location too, which pushes these places far more into utility above experiential value, even if the experiential value is usually still good, which it often is in Yōtei. As well, you also have Cornifer who sells you the maps of places you didn't find, and people in the world who will tell you about locations you haven't marked yet, just so you can make sure you've checked everything off, and you end up with ultimately a design philosophy no different than Tsushima, following wind to markers to complete the activity and move on. I'm conflicted on how you fix this, because short of the game becoming Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild, which, by the way, the spyglass tries so hard to replicate but fails because in Breath of the Wild you're tagging stuff you think might be interesting and on the way discovering a bunch of other things that the game hasn't told you about, rather than the game telling you from a distance this is a thing, this is not a thing. Just removing the tagging of locations automatically or the maps given to the player would result in an experience like Burning Shores was for Forbidden West, a frustrating exercise in tedium as you try to discern where is worth your time and where isn't with no indication from the game, while also the game asking you to check things off of a list anyway. I think the only way to solve this issue is to do away with checklisting, to make discoverability its own reward. I don't want this to come across as purely negative. Critiques often can because they're ultimately critiques that dig into the issues. But I think the same way Tsushima managed to alleviate some of the pain points of modern open-world games, Yōtei does that too, and while it doesn't totally solve checklisting, I don't even really think it tries to, it does make general exploration of a conventional open world probably the most fun it's ever been. The same as I said about Tsushima, and differently from Tsushima, there never actually came a point where I stopped wondering what was just over a ridge or through a tree line, and that feeling, despite the game being able to tell me, of wondering what I could find, is one that is rich and carries an experience like this, and sometimes that feeling matters most. Sure, the spyglass could tell me that it was a hot spring, sure, it could tell me what a building was, but heading there, you'd find other things too. Quests aren't marked, they're found, and you aren't marking everything, some stuff you are just stumbling across, and so the journey to a marked location is still full of discoverability, and it makes your journey to a thing you know is certain, uncertain, and full of things to catch your attention. I do think sometimes, especially at the start of the game, it's maybe a little too alive, in that things just keep happening at you, and it feels a little disorienting just how little downtime there is. But I think this settles, and you end up feeling like you're moving through a living world with plenty worth your time, an artistic presentation that evokes the same feeling Tsushima could, and more. The camping system to refill your spirit and do some cooking feels cozy and immersive, especially in a nice pretty spot in the woods, just the kind of thing I said I wanted in my Tsushima video, although doing the little fire and cooking minigame over and over can get incredibly tedious. Thankfully, you can choose the option to make it automatic, but that kinda sucks, right? I never felt the tedium in a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 was ever actually tedium. It was streamlined tedium. I don't know if that even makes sense. Whereas here, it's not. It's playing pretend at RDR2 mechanics while just being intrusive, and that's a shame. But don't get it twisted, I like the camping mechanic, both for immersion and as a utility when on lethal mode to refill spirit and get an extra useful perk. I did think maybe at a point Atsu would stop hovering her hand above her sword when friends approached her camp, like as a little bit of a visual representation that she's becoming a little more trusting, but that didn't happen. She always does it. Not a major issue, but something I've thought about. What I do like a lot, though, on the topic of immersive things, is Zenny Hajiki in gambling dens, where I like to spend most of my time in real life and Persona 5. The only issue with gambling is that if you fuck it up, they will one-turn you, and it's never not infuriating, because you know if you mess up, you've lost. So it's really a test of if you can have a perfect run first time, which kind of ruins the point of the game, but the game slaps nonetheless. It's no Gwent or even Machine Strike, but it's fun. Moving around the world is very similar to Tsushima in the focused areas with good in-world indications of where to go and just enough obscuring of sightlines to make breaking through a set of trees or navigating around a cliff rewarding. The larger areas are interesting because while they often consist of huge vast stretches of field with nothing of note, I kind of love that. Something not vying for your attention, just negative space to absorb Eizo and your place in it. The birds, wild horses, and the cinematic camera only add to this. Sometimes presentation and feeling do wonders, even when mechanically there is nothing happening. The only issues I encountered, really, with moving around the space was out-of-bounds areas not being properly signposted, so you could sometimes just fall into a black void and get reset, or the game would refuse to let you jump over fences, and rigidity like that can often lead to decreased immersion, especially when it feels nonsensical. Like, why can't I jump this? I have to go around? Why? Just let me jump over the fucking thing. Oh, and talking of rigidity, the other thing that bothers the heck out of me is finding areas before a quest lets you, in that some areas of the world are there specifically for quests to take place, like this graveyard in Teshio Ridge or this shrine in Oshima Coast, or even just the camps that exist for the conclusion of Wolf Den locations. For the former, finding them feels a little strange and takes the wind out of the moment you arrive there in the story, and for the latter, it's incredibly immersion-breaking to find an empty camp only to be led there by a wolf 3 hours later, and suddenly there are caged animals and Mongols guarding it. Not Mongols, Saito's gooners, you know what I meant. This shit is genuinely annoying, and it does happen kinda often if you're trying to explore a lot as the game wants you to. If you aren't doing shit in the right order, though, you can wind up confused. I think one of the things I observed about the design of the world is how the design and intent feels flipped from Tsushima. Let me try and explain here what I mean as best I can. In Tsushima, the frequency of locations indicates to me that it expects a player on a casual playthrough to miss some. An area, for example, might have 8 to 10 hot springs, and the game maybe expects the player to find 4 or 5 of them. And in doing so, they'll get a decent health boost, even if they don't go out of their way to find all of them. However, with the way the map is structured and the question mark system, the game encourages completing everything. Yōtei, on the other hand, has a frequency of locations that actually indicates it would be wrong to miss any. In one area, there might be only 3 hot springs, all of which are essential to increasing your base health. However, the way the map is structured encourages clearing everything far less than Tsushima did, and so it feels like you end up with the same issue but from a different means. It almost feels like you need to blend the two. A map system and location tracking system like Yōtei, but with the frequency of things from Tsushima, meaning you can miss stuff and be fine, although then it did lend itself towards pure tedium when someone wants to do everything, and so Yōtei clearly did try to balance it all. I think it comes down to an issue with modern game design, especially in the AAA space, with trophies and platinums and the need to complete things 100%. I understand the desire to track your stats, the things you've done and collected. Games have done that forever, but tying rewards to it, trophies that say, I did everything, has never really benefited game design, especially for open world games. Could you imagine going for the platinum in something like like Skyrim. It feels antithetical to the way the game is built. Imagine trying to 100% Skyrim. That's just madness. But doing it with Ghost or Assassin's Creed is normal because the games are built for it, because they have to be, because it's standard. And I think ultimately it's this modern gaming necessity that can affect the design of so many worlds negatively. That all said, clearing everything in Yōtei wasn't actually a chore. So despite my criticisms, despite my complaints, I think they really nailed the balance here. Most every single area I cleared without meaning to, on my way to main quests or just by being distracted by things in the distance. With the Shikari Plains, for example, when I finished the main quest there, I had maybe 4 things I hadn't done, so I took 15 minutes to just go and do them. Maybe gain some more health or spirit, and then moved on. The only area I found a chore was Teshio Ridge, which, like I already said, is painfully Tsushima-coded in the worst way, being far, far too densely packed with stuff, and repetitive stuff at that. The runner-up being Takachi Range, mainly for just being a little boring of a location, to be honest, when coming out of the grasslands in Ishikari Plains, which is just... Oshima also suffers differently from being in a war zone. Everything you're doing feels a little bizarre when you're at war, and that's always going to be the case. It's a little similar to Act 3 Tsushima in that way, but I think it tries a little harder to justify itself, and most everything you're doing does tie back into your fight, other than, like, helping the bounty guy with a bounty he put on his own head, or whatever. I mean, doing bounties at all in this area feels a little mental. We are at war. Get a grip, Atsu. Fucking hell. Also, I have in my notes, there's a lake in the grasslands that is perfectly circular, and one of my patrons doesn't like it because he's stupid. His name is Hartman. Once again, like I said in the Tsushima video, with comparison to The Witcher 3, while Tsushima handles exploration of the world far better, The Witcher 3 still ends up winning out because the substance of what you do when you visit locations or engage in quests is far and away more engaging and meaningful. I suppose it's not a totally fair criticism, as CDPR are the very best at making the substance of their world conducive with their story and themes, but using a gold standard as a marker is helpful for criticism. Yōtei, I truly feel, tries its hardest to remedy this. It doesn't always do so flawlessly, and does sometimes fall into traps that affected Tsushima, but by and large, I think engaging with the substance is so much more meaningful this time around. One of the core ways they do this is purely just in open world justification. I didn't really talk about this in the Tsushima video, but the context for exploring Tsushima isn't really all that strong. The game is an open world, so you explore the open world. But with a quest as specific as Jin's was, it can sometimes feel, especially in Act 2 and especially in Act 3, that the open world is at odds with the story they're actually telling. The reason for the world existing in the capacity it exists in a video game ideally needs contextual justification to immerse the player in doing what they're doing. It's why one of the biggest criticisms of The Witcher 3 can sometimes be, but we're searching for Ciri, why am I going off doing X, Y, or Z? And I do think there's merit to that criticism, but that's for another video, unless you want a whole chapter of this Yōtei critique dedicated to breaking down the justification or lack thereof for The Witcher 3's open world. I mean, I could do it. It's my video. Nobody can tell me what to do. I won't. But just know it's because of my own self-control and not because I get annoyed comments, alright? Yōtei justifies its open world through the lens that it exists as a place Atsu is moving through on her search for the Yōtei Six. However, it doubles up then as everything she experiences in this open space is her reconnecting with the humanity she thought she'd lost. Every hot spring reflection, painting, memory, bounty, side quest, or random encounter plays directly into Atsu reconnecting with Eizo, with her home and with herself. In turn, giving her a reason to live. I think this is one of the biggest ways Yōtei improves over Tsushima. Simple contextualization. It's not that Tsushima was bad, it was just thin. Yōtei to me is thick and girthy and very, very satisfying. This gives returning activities like hot springs, bamboo strikes, pillars of the fallen, and yes, even the godforsaken foxes, greater meaning to Atsu on a personal level than they had for Jin. Not to mention, they all take on slightly different forms too. Bamboo strikes can sometimes have crowds, or maybe they have to be rebuilt, or you use your left arm instead, or you're challenged to it by some bystanders. Similarly, hot springs have notes that contain specific instructions that, when completed, give you a nice little visual to accompany Atsu having a moment to reflect. Foxes too will sometimes lead you to loot rather than straight to the shrine, or to people, camps, or friends stuck that you have to help. You could argue that this just adds busy work to busy work, and in some cases, I'd agree. I think it just adds extra steps, and for some of the foxes, they felt just as tedious, but now you had to pull open some rocks on a small cave because their mate somehow got themselves trapped. It sometimes gave me the same feeling as the assassin recruit missions in Assassin's Creed Revelations. It's the same as Brotherhood, but now you have to do busy work with a bunch of random-ass NPCs that you don't care about. It's feigning depth, but ends up as tedium and friction. But I think most of the time, these are smaller additions that just help to make the things you're doing feel more bespoke and personal, as well as organic rather than a constant repeating pattern of certainty. It isn't perfect. Bamboo strikes are ultimately always bamboo strikes, but you never know exactly what will happen specifically, and so it does always retain a sense of wonder, even if only minor, and I think that's neat. Not insanely praiseworthy, but neat and nice and better than Tsushima. They also swapped haikus for paintings in this game, and I really like them. It's nice to have locations that provide that moment of thoughtfulness and appreciation for the world you're in, the nature that surrounds you, but one that fits more with Atsu as a character in her childhood. I don't have tons to say, but I like these a lot. I always felt glad when I stumbled upon one out in the wilderness. Another new addition that I already sort of touched on are the wolf dens. The wolf is a major motif that we'll discuss later, but it manifests through caves throughout the world, always with dead wolves outside plus dead guys who killed the wolves, and then your wolf mate snarling and leading you to a camp of bad guys so you can kill them and then free the wolves there and then get a new wolf skill point. These are probably the worst locations in the game because they are quite literally the exact same thing every single time. I get the idea. I get the cute bond with the wolf spilling into side content, and I like that the wolf can show up sometimes, but the actual dens themselves are so bad, and there are also too many of them. Not as many as there were fox dens in Tsushima, don't get it twisted, that game still wins out in that regard, but the wolf dens here are the only place I feel Yōtei truly falters in its open world locations in a major way. Shrines return in Yōtei, although there aren't as many of them, and they never quite felt as grand to me. When you came across a shrine in Tsushima, it always felt like a major location, and despite the rubbish climbing mechanics, was incredibly cool when you reached the top. Yōtei still has a nicer view, and you often get a chance to use them as literal viewpoints to scout the world with the spyglass, but they still felt less grand in a way I'm struggling to put into words. Usually they're more tucked away, and you don't get the awe until you reach the top, whereas in Tsushima you'd sort of feel the scale as you went. And speaking of climbing itself, it's not exactly improved in Yōtei. It is effectively the same as Tsushima, with one single change that, despite remaining mechanically the same, makes it feel infinitely better, and that's the simple climbing animation itself. In Tsushima, you'd kind of just jump from ledge to ledge while holding up. In Yōtei, you still hold a single direction, but Atsu scrambles along rocks, in and out of handholds, and there's often an ounce more interactivity as you do so. It reminds me a lot of Assassin's Creed 3 with its rock climbing animations that were also automated, but the smoothness kind of makes it feel good nonetheless, and Yōtei does try. You're often jumping to new handholds, across to swing from trees, and sliding down slopes and timing your jumps to reach new ledges. There's more going on here, but I don't think it ever truly reaches beyond what Iki Island achieved, which is to say, solid. I can't complain, it's fun, even if it's not complex. I do think advanced movement in action games needs to make a comeback, and Jedi Survivor proved you can, but Yōtei's shrine climbs are far from bad, but also still a ways off from anything truly worth praising. I also think the climb to the top of Mount Yōtei was lame. It's essentially a glorified skybox that you teleport to. I expected maybe a real intense climb to something that was so central to the game's setting, but no, you teleport and do a pretty normal climb, and that's all you really get. It's a bit of a letdown. Also, while we're on the topic of teleporting, what's this all about? Why did they change this? In trying to contextualize Atsu's descent from a shrine, from the time jump that Tsushima had, just like a fast forward to him going down the shrine, they make it 10 times more silly by suggesting she traveled a mile away in a jump down. This isn't like a real criticism, but it is pretty funny. One of the activities I didn't love, and honestly it might have just been a skill issue, were the reliquaries. You can find these stone monuments across the world with little riddles. They're essentially a similar sort of thing to the little PlayStation reference locations that were in Iki Island, and they require you to turn these fox statues to face certain directions. Some are easy, and some, I don't know what you fucking wanted from me. You said face the mountain, but which one? Yōtei, surely, right? No, they mean the fake fucking mountain on the fucking stupid statue. Are you kidding me? I'm not gonna harp on about this, and yes, I might be an idiot, but to me, this wasn't obvious. This feels insane. I've also been holding off, but I guess we'd better discuss bandit camps, the catch-all term for strongholds, enemy bases, outposts, etc. They're pretty good. I can't sit here and lie, by the end of Oshima I was a little over them, despite their obviously superior design to Tsushima, better contextualization narratively, and far lower frequency. By the time I did maybe the last 2, I was already over them, which is far better than Tsushima, let's not get it twisted, but I think clearing out camps, no matter how unique, is always at a point going to become a chore in any game ever made, ever. I'm not sure I can think of a single game where bandit camps are ever really fun, and even if they start off fun, like they do in Yōtei, eventually you do reach a point of, alright, there better not be another one again, please. Again, I think a lot of this comes down to checklisting being overbearing, and the contextualization that you should be clearing these camps for story reasons leaves you not really wanting to miss any. To bring it back to Skyrim, nobody is ever trying to clear every bandit camp in Skyrim. The only reason you clear any of them is for organic reasons of, I stumbled upon a camp, let's see if they have any valuables lying around, or notes with tips about possible quests. So you don't feel bad if you miss a bandit camp. In fact, the concept of missing something in Skyrim doesn't even really exist because the substance of the game isn't built around checking things off of a list. I don't think games like Ghost would be worse if we, at the very least, decreased the amount the game encouraged checking everything off. But like I said, the design is superior, and they don't go on for as long as Tsushima, which is tremendous. The rewards are worthwhile, the context is a nice bonus, and they're all pretty unique, and so it allows the core mechanics to flourish, which we'll discuss in a little bit. One of the odd choices, though, is how it handles boss-type enemies, usually bounties that exist within camps. You can stealth the entire place, but you will still be forced into combat no matter what, despite having successfully stealthed the camp. The boss will always call his goons, and you'll always have to fight them as they try to revive him despite clearing the place in stealth, and stealth killing the boss himself. It's lame and doesn't offer enough depth to be worth not giving the player the autonomy to just pure stealth it if they want to. There is more with regards to camp I'd like to discuss in a bit, but that'll be in the narrative section. Beyond locations, you of course have quests, or as Ghost calls them, tales. I'll be calling them quests because I'm better than you. The main 3, well, actually the only 3, are myths, bounties, and your regular side quests. Side quests, to me, are hugely improved from what was in Tsushima. Rather than markers on the map that add to things that you have to mop up with stories that are either long and tedious or short and shallow, you have a range of different stories you stumble across just by wandering around. Sometimes characters will be at major locations like inns or next to other points of interest, or sometimes they'll just be out in the wilds. Making this distinct change in how you acquire quests already makes them feel organic and systemic, and other words like that, dynamic probably. It lets them feel like little events you came across as you were riding around. It also lowers the stakes for how involved and interesting the quest actually has to be, because you talk to a person and sometimes it can start a full-on quest, but sometimes it can just be as simple as a small event that lasts a couple of minutes. The longer quests generally have substance that contributes to the cohesion of the arc you're exploring. For example, in Ishikari Plains, the most cohesive area, the side quests all play back into the theming revolving around connections and belonging, while also complementing the exploration of who the Oni is. There are of course side quests that suck, let's not get it twisted. There are plenty of Tsushima-esque quests in this game that are lame and suffer from on-the-nose writing that obviously do tie back into the core themes, but feel like they were written by a 3-year-old with crayons. But for the most part, this stuff is far more in line with Iki Island, and is streamlined to a point where it feels like a natural part of your exploration of the world rather than quests you're marking off in a log. In fact, I don't even know if this game has a quest log. Oh, I guess it does with the cards on the map. I just never really thought about it because it's just a far more organic way of having you track quests, despite it just being a minor UI change, which is kind of cool actually. Because of this change though to the context, there are really no standout side quests, and Yōtei struggles to live up to something like Horizon Forbidden West, which I think has some of the best side quests in any recent ARPGs, like I said in my review, rivaling even The Witcher 3 in some cases, especially with regards to cohesion, and definitely with regards to compelling characters. Yōtei doesn't do this, but I also don't think it tries to. I think its side tales actually, rather than trying to build on Tsushima and make them bigger and more memorable, kind of do what they were always better at, and decide to be more low-key, smaller events, smaller stories, smaller tasks, that have thematic value, but don't stop you for too long to pull you into this large series of events. They flesh out the world, but aren't major distractions, and I honestly think that was the right call for a game like this. I said with regards to the character tales in Tsushima that they could have been done in 3 quests max, and Yōtei seemed to agree, pretty much removing them entirely in favor of sometimes just singular quests for specific characters who can give you tools, like Hana Anna, who provides the kunai for clearing the farms in Teshio, which ties her story into the clearing of those stand-in camp locations, or Ina the bomb maker, who provides you with bombs for helping her in her mini-quest. They aren't deep, and I cannot praise them in that regard, but I can praise them for complementing the world and not dragging the experience down like they did in Tsushima. Instead, they are uncumbersome, and a lot of the time, enjoyable little events as you traverse the world in search of your larger goals, and I think that has merit to show a level of restraint in a game like this. That said, one of my biggest complaints about these events is that sometimes you think you're doing what could be a small, actionless little story, one where you have a meaningful conversation or just simply navigate an area, but the game doesn't really know how to do that, so instead, it'll force some kind of combat to end a quest. Either the quest giver was tricking you, or bandits appear out of nowhere, and it gets really old. Sometimes I think you could just let us have downtime, just let us vibe with a cool NPC for a few minutes, learn their story, and just move on. These were generally the best quests, ones that didn't need to force combat but allowed themselves to just be simple. Myths are this game's mythic tales, and there are far more of them this time around, and also often lean far more into mysticism. One of the things I praise these quests for in Tsushima is that they were always grounded in reality. You learn the strange and magical tale only to discover the truth of it, and how the tale came to be concocted, and then you learn a new skill or get some cool armor. This game, though, seems to just outright say sometimes, yeah, look, I just is magic, I don't know. And big shocker from me here, I think that's kind of lame. Who could have guessed? I don't think exploring a myth only to discover the myth is actually true and it is mythical is interesting, because then it's not a myth, it's just a real story, and this world does have magic in it. I think Takezo and the Stormblade are both the best ones, but we'll actually discuss both of them later. Takezo during our chat about bosses, and the Stormblade during the narrative. The rest are all still engaging quests. The Crimson Kimono is especially compelling with how it plays into Atsu's journey. Wearing the armor felt crucial during Teshio Ridge because of just how well it linked to her journey. The Spider Lily quest is also another standout that has a very specific vibe and clearly tries to mimic a bit of a survival horror type aesthetic with its Silent Hill-esque fog and collecting of keys. I do think, though, sometimes Yōtei and games like it can try to do interesting things, but because of their rigid mechanics, often have to work around only allowing for specific mechanics, and so some of the quests can come off as a little bit goofy. The game isn't built to be what it needs to be for this quest to flourish, and so it feels like a fan mod sometimes, and I think that's something Assassin's Creed Valhalla suffered from in places too. It's not a major complaint, and I understand why it's like this. I cannot expect them to design entirely new systems for a single quest, and I'm not suggesting that they should, but just that it can become very noticeable when it tonally and structurally steps outside the bounds of its fundamental mechanical design how rigid the game is, because it has to still use certain mechanics despite it feeling a little goofy to do so. These were generally all interesting stories though, and all play into the central theming and character work, so it felt worth my time to play, both to see what they'd do tonally, how they'd make it specifically unique, and how they'd bolster the main path, so they're generally great. Rewards this time, though, are generally just armor or charms. There is one that gives you an ability, and that's great. How that ties together is wonderful, but it's strange that something like Heavenly Strike or Horse Charge, which were mythic skills in Tsushima, yet in Yōtei, they're just casually in the skill tree. It feels a bit incongruent, and links to a point I want to make in the section of the video where we talk about progression, so just give me a sec and we'll do that, because I think it's an interesting thing to think about, and I'm not the only one who's felt it either. Bounties are the last kind of side quests, and these range from really cool and unique to incredibly lame and funny in a bad way. You pick up bounties from the inn on a bounty board, and upon completing them are granted money. You know, weirdly, I feel like the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor could have fit this game really well if WB Games hadn't patented it and then never used it again ever. Bounties are out in the world and sometimes will just be guys you have to head in and kill either by stealth or combat or however you want, but sometimes they're stories. Sometimes you meet the bounty person, or it was a misunderstanding and you help them, or you work together and they trick you and then you meet them again in 25 hours and they're pretending to be a lord and it's a really compelling payoff. There is a whole range, and I think generally they're always fun. The only issue I really have is that I wish you could always stealth targets. I guess I was expecting assassination contracts, and when I was met with being forced into combat a lot of the time, I felt a little disappointed, which isn't to say these are bad, just that I didn't really have the itch scratched that I wanted scratched, which isn't an actual critique of the game, but just something that would have been nice, which is why the Nemesis system could have been really cool in a game like this. Fuck you, Warner Brothers. Okay, let's talk about progression. I've actually got notes this time. Not that I don't always have notes when I write these scripts, but usually I glaze over progression because famously I find it really boring to write about, and that's because skill trees are inherently boring, and once you criticize one, you've basically criticized all of them. Modern AAA games are fucking homogenous, who knew? Yōtei, though, does things I actually have stuff worth talking about, so let's unpack it. First up, I said that Heavenly Strike being in the skill tree felt weird, and linked to another point worth talking about, and that's how Atsu starts this game. Now, this is tinfoil hat stuff, so not as much a genuine theory as it is conjecture, but you start this game with so many skills that Jin ended Tsushima with, and a lot of the stuff you gain through the skill tree is stuff that Jin gained across Tsushima. You start with the grapple, Onryo's howl, a horse. The progression of this game and how you start reminds me so much of Brotherhood Ezio, and because of that, for the briefest of moments, I wondered if this game was ever meant to be a Jin sequel. How much of the base mechanics carried over because it was originally supposed to be Jin you were playing as, but it was changed to Atsu and the mechanics remained because that's just how the game was built. Like I said, total fucking conjecture, and it might just be that they wanted to start you with similar skills, and it's explained contextually that I guess she learned this shit somewhere, and grapples are also maybe normal to have, I don't know, but it's interesting because what if? To get into the actual progression system, this game does away with skill points, which sounds good, and at first I also thought that was a bold choice, to tie progression to exploration, but it falls into the exact same trap as Breath of the Wild, and one of that game's biggest flaws. Shrines are how you level, and the only way you level. If you want to level in Yōtei, you have to find an altar, and the game really doesn't want you to miss them. They are very easily spotted with the spyglass, and Cornifer will always prioritize maps to altars when you reach a new area, so you never fall behind on skills because they are obviously very important. Altars are also rewards for every camp or enemy outpost, and the new reward for reaching the top of shrines. Altars are fucking everywhere, and by the halfway point of the game, no, before even reaching that point, you realize what a goddamn flawed system this is. While a traditional skill point system feels dated and boring, at least you're gaining skills as you do things in the world, rather than doing one specific thing in the world to get any random skill. It's not passive, it's the opposite of that in this case, and the word escapes me, but it means you're often going out of your way to find tons of altars when you reach a new area. The game has 61, and maybe only 10 of them are actually fun to get. The rest are either rewards for camps or random locations dotted around that just add a wasted location so you can gain a skill. I think the most simple remedy for this is something the game actually already does: different locations or different requirements for different types of skills. The wolf dens are specific to leveling the wolf skills, so why not have altars be for your base skills, things that are fundamental to the character, like survival or health or utility upgrades, and then have maybe weapon skills linked to regular skill points, so by using your weapons, killing bosses, clearing camps, you gain points you can use to level weapon skills, and then say for Onryo abilities or stealth skills, you gain points when raising your legend, which is still a thing in this game. Every time you find a poster of yourself, you refill your spirit meter, so why couldn't that have given you one Onryo skill point, something that goes towards a specific skill? It'd diversify how you're leveling and make it feel far less railroaded, and would also change how you level, because for the first 10 altars, every point went into stealth, and then every point went into another tree that I was currently prioritizing. If you diversified, then you'd have to think a bit more about where that specific skill point went, because it could only go into specific trees, and would probably encourage a little more experimentation. The current system is one of the few ways I think Yōtei is actually worse than Tsushima. I get what they were going for, and I admire that they tried, but in practice, it does not work. The other area of progression is crafting, because, say it with me, what would a modern AAA game be without crafting? Some would say, good. I'm never going to retire that one. It essentially is identical to Tsushima. Armor and weapons you upgrade via materials, and we'll talk about weapons a bit more in the next section because they also have quests, but for now, the crafting is essentially the same thing. The only difference is how bizarrely plentiful the materials are in this game. In Tsushima, playing on Lethal, I mentioned how every upgrade meant something, how often I'd be scavenging for resources because I wanted the next katana upgrade or to max the armor I was using so I was well equipped enough, because Lethal was so tough, and so I'd actually end up entering buildings I usually wouldn't just for some extra supplies, or clear a camp I'd missed because I needed the gold. It did sometimes turn locations into utility, but it gave them a utility the game didn't have when I was playing on a normal difficulty. In Yōtei, you get so many materials so fast, and most are just randomly looted from the ground, from enemies, from every location you visit. Never once, not a single time, did I ever search for materials in Yōtei. You could argue that that's a good thing, that you never have to quote-unquote grind, but it was never a grind in Tsushima. It was just basic exploration. It was seeking out the materials you needed. It was going out of your way ever so slightly to check an abandoned house. In Yōtei, when you enter a new area, you immediately, without realizing, will have all of the stuff you need to upgrade every weapon and all of your armor to the max level for that region. And I think that balancing really sucks. I guess because there are so many weapons in the game, you need more materials, but the fact I was never at any point lacking for materials feels insane and far too much of an overcorrection from a system that I don't think needed much correcting to begin with. Couple of tail end things here with regards to progression that I couldn't weave naturally into the script. See what I did there? Weave? Like because of a weaver? Like fuck. Every specific thing in the game that can be upgraded or purchased or interacted with is tied to a specific NPC who is part of your wolf pack, and we'll discuss the wolf pack a bit later. But what this means is that every hub inn for a region has to have all of these facilities, and so it means all of these NPCs are constantly teleporting across the world when you fast travel, not to mention the fact they have to follow along for the story. It's not a major issue, but it is immersion breaking when every major vendor just happens to enter the next region at the same time that you do, and will return to the previous region also when you do. Oh, Oshima Coaster's at war? Lucky every vendor in the game decided to come to the war zone at the same time as you, isn't it? I think an easy fix is to just have one specific vendor per region. That way, that area is their thing and it doesn't break immersion. Fast travel is instant, so it's not like you can't instantly jump back if you need one of them. And don't say it's for convenience, because there's only one forge. You can only upgrade your weapons at your homestead because of thematic reasons, so why couldn't you have done the same thing for vendors? I'm okay with the bounty guy moving around, I think I can buy that, but for the rest it just feels a little silly, and I won't concede that here. It does feel silly, and it could have been mitigated. You even could have had assistants who deal with the main vendor's business in different regions to keep the convenience without it being so silly. It's not even like these guys matter that much. They don't have insanely integral ties to you or each other. They are just people you vaguely know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll discuss Wolfpack in a bit. I also have to ask the question here, very simply, why can't you dye every armor every color? I think there are 3 outfits you can dye black in the whole game? What the fuck are we doing here? Is it really that hard to make it so you can dye every outfit every color? I get having specific outfit dyes from merchants, that's fun and makes each one unique, but at specific dye locations, white, red, green, blue, and black, why can you not apply those specific and rare dyes to every outfit? It's one of those things I can see them adding in an update in 4 months when I'm not playing it, but will appreciate in 5 years when I replay the game. Or they won't, but it's an aspect that I dislike. Also, transmog would have been good. I think transmog is a bit lame sometimes, and I get why it's not in the game now. It probably will be later, same as New Game Plus, because they have to drip feed features so player numbers stay up so that they can show their shareholders, blah blah blah, capitalism. But I genuinely do think in a game like Ghost, where specific ability sets are tied to specific outfits, not having transmog does harm the experience, because you get an outfit that has abilities you love, but you maybe want to wear a different look for thematic reasons, and so you're kind of stuck. For a lot of the game, I wore the Crimson Kimono. I would have loved to have worn the Shinobi gear, but it had worse stats. And in the end, I wore the Onryo outfit despite it having stats for things I never used because it made more sense thematically, which was annoying for my playstyle, having to compromise stats for visuals, and I don't think doing so actually adds anything of value to the game. There's no risk-reward. It's not like swapping charms out where you have to weigh up your options and make concessions. It's literally choosing to wear an armor that you like or one that will help you, and that's lame. Also, with regards to charms, which I totally forgot to add a note for in my notes here, I will concede, they slap in this game. I think playing around with charms and their abilities was some of the most fun I've had in a game like this, and honestly, was the most RPG an ARPG has ever felt for me. It reminded me somewhat of building characters in an old school Final Fantasy, or more recently Clair Obscur, trying to deck out Atsu with the best charms possible to combine their abilities with my current outfit and playstyle for a specific boss or encounter to be as efficient as possible, and there are so many cool ones with unique effects that it just makes it endlessly engaging, and that's the only time ever I might say that about reading words in a pause menu. Huge improvement from Tsushima. On the polar opposite end of looking at UI and reading text, we have actually engaging with the combat. And I said in my video on Tsushima, that game has some of the best action-oriented yet challenging combat of a game of this nature, and I think that only rings more true in Yōtei. The basis consists of the same setup: attacks to deal damage during openings, heavy attacks to stagger enemies and break their guard, dodges for red glints, or any attack you want to dodge for that matter, and blue glints for attacks that can be parried but not blocked, but can also be dodged. All of the fundamentals remain unchanged, and I think that's a good basis. There's no need to reinvent the wheel when you've got a solid system. Instead, they build on top of it, and not in ways that overcook the system as some games can do, in my opinion. Again, I could segue into why I used specific footage here, but instead you'll have to infer and then leave angry comments about what you think I mean. First way they build on the system is with multiple consecutive parries. When you don't have the perfect parry ability, or you just miss the timing for one, you can still perform a regular parry, which deflects an attack and builds their stagger meter. In Yōtei, if you do this, enemies who are performing a string of attacks will continue to attack rather than be pushed aside, meaning you have to parry their attacks in sequence to receive an opening, which feels heavily inspired by something like Sekiro, and I think taking inspiration like that is pretty great. It works its way into a system that was already built around parrying, and not only does it make general fights a little bit harder, especially on lethal, it also works seamlessly into a system Tsushima created, as well as fixing a minor flaw of that game's parry system. Perfect parries staggered an enemy and left them open to attacks, and that was always better than a regular parry. However, if you did pull off a regular parry, they were also left open to an attack, which didn't create a massive disparity between hitting a regular parry or a perfect one. There was a difference, but your safety was never in question. In Yōtei, if you don't hit a perfect parry, you have to contend with the rest of their attack sequence, which on lethal can be a death sentence if you weren't prepared, versus hitting a perfect parry, interrupting them, dealing major damage, and also feeling great about yourself. It's insane how much a minor change creates a ripple effect to improve general flow and satisfaction of a system that was already so strong. That said, when you do unlock perfect parries, you will often disrupt their sequence, and that becomes the norm. Not to mention outfits like the Bounty Master gear that removes regular parries in favor of superior perfect parries, and charm builds centered around hitting them easier. And for a lot of my playthrough, I ended up not actually encountering the parry sequence mechanic all that often. I'm undecided whether this is a flaw or not. I don't think the game was ever trying to be Sekiro. I don't think forced parry sequences should necessarily be built into Ghost, but the fact the system after the first 10 hours can basically be completely ignored feels like a waste of something that I found really interesting when I first began playing. Maybe something to build upon in the future is perfect parry strings, although maybe it would get too technical and too complicated for a game that is ultimately far more of a casual action experience, despite having a lot of complexity under the surface, especially on lethal. It doesn't stop here though. They continue to build on regular combat with disarms. Enemies can now perform yellow glint moves, which if landed will send your current weapon flying from your hands somewhere for you to pick up, where you'll have to quickly switch to another weapon or avoid their attacks without one until you can reach your own, which multiple times left me in a situation I could struggle to come back from, but not in a way that felt bullshit, in a way that felt like it was my own fault, because you also have the ability to counter these moves. By holding triangle and releasing at the right time, similar to a standoff, you can counter their disarm and disarm the enemy right back, leaving them open. But it's tight, and sometimes can be tough to pull off, which creates a really engaging risk-reward mechanic, where you have to weigh up whether going for that disarm or simply playing it safe with a dodge is the right call, and you have to make it very, very fast in some cases, and I don't think it ever felt unbalanced until maybe the final boss of the game, which is a specific instance that I'll discuss probably in the bosses section of the video, or more likely at the end of the video in the narrative section. I don't know, I haven't decided yet. We'll see. I don't know. We're writing this together. This is a collaborative experience. Talking about standoffs themselves, this is one of the features I thought maybe was a little out of place in this game, or maybe could have used a rework to fit into the game. Standoffs existed in Tsushima because it's kind of the whole classic samurai thing, like I said in that video, similar to dueling for a western. But in a game where you aren't a samurai, were these really contextualized well? I don't think so. I think this game probably should have omitted standoffs. I think you can make them work. You can say, oh, it makes sense that Atsu would be taunting her enemies to come and try her to then cut them down. And yeah, look, logically, sure, it works fine, but thematically, I think including standoffs, a classic samurai piece of iconography, was probably the wrong move here, and I barely used them because they didn't feel like they had as much utility as Tsushima, other than with the wolf, which I can admit was cool, but it felt very much like when you see a feature from a previous Assassin's Creed in the next Assassin's Creed, even though it doesn't really fit purely because it was in the last one and Ubisoft are too afraid to remove things. Except for when they're not. Oh, as well, I have a note that says, can move when holstering weapons, which I, again, cannot integrate into the script, so I'm just saying it here. I think this is very cool because I love the animation in Tsushima, but it was so annoying how Jin wouldn't move. Atsu can. This is great. Maybe one of my favorite things the game does. I love little improvements on neat mechanics like this. The biggest way I feel this game improves on the first entry, though, is with the weapon system. On paper, this is essentially a reskin of the start system, and that it is. Let's not get it twisted. This game follows the exact same rock, paper, scissors Pokemon approach as Tsushima, but the simple change of stances to weapons just allows the system to feel entirely more dynamic in a way that feels game-changing while in practice being the most superficial change of all time. This system is basically what I talked about in my Jedi Survivor video, and is probably how that game should have handled its stances, being able to switch them all on the fly so they can be used for specific circumstances, requiring the player to think on their feet and adjust their playstyle to match what's required of them in tight windows that put you into a rhythm of dodge, parry, weapon swap, attack, and it becomes this wonderfully methodical dance that's almost muscle memory by the end. You just press the buttons once you're locked in, and it is the stance system elevated to a new plane of being. Not to mention, you're far better able to adjust your weapons without room for error when it's so clear which one you're holding and which you're supposed to be holding. Sometimes in Tsushima, you could be in the wrong stance and just not realize because you forgot the specific pose, and it takes you out of the flow state when you have to hold R2 to double check if you do or don't have the correct stance. With weapons, you can literally see which one you're holding, and it's easy to remember katana for swordmen, spear for kusarigama, dual katana for spears, kusarigama for shield, and odachi for brutes. You ain't forgetting that shit. It is logical, taught in a staggered way that is story-based, and is visually represented by the weapon you're holding. It's tremendous stuff. Speaking of how the weapons are all learned, I think it's pretty clever to have each weapon art be taught by an ally, someone you are actively getting to know and finding common ground with. It flips things from Jin learning from his enemy. Atsu instead is learning from friends, the same as she does with tools. These quests do vary in quality, though. The dual katana is the best, probably because Hanbei is a character who shows up again in the story, but the use of the left hand teaching you how to use the other side of the controller in bamboo cutting is such a tremendous piece of gameplay narrative synergy to put you in Atsu's shoes. The spear quest is also good too. I liked it teaching you that you can spear fish, which is cool, but it also gives you a good sense of progression of ability and skill, and again puts that feeling in the player's hands, being slow and inaccurate at first, and later being fast and on point. I think it feels nice, not to mention the character work is well executed. I think the rest are pretty rough. Odachi is outright boring, Kusarigama tries, but it's a little goofy with the ice minigame shit, but all pretty much fall into the same bizarre formula of raiders interrupting your training to force you into combat so you can test your new skills. It's really silly and becomes annoying. It sometimes feels like the game is treating you like a child, especially when the weapons master has this little Dora the Explorer game with you before you go into combat.
Show me what weapon to draw when fighting a swordsman. Good. And if your enemy stands a head taller than you? Yes, the power of your Odachi will overwhelm them.
Thanks, fuckhead. I have to say, also, weapons have been balanced for lethal far better than Tsushima. The game doesn't make enemies spongy the way Iki Island did, but instead makes them harder to stagger, so it encourages using the correct weapon, but also using additional weapon skills that in Tsushima felt obsolete on lethal mode, and that's a welcome addition. Something I have seen, mainly on Reddit, is people complaining about this system, saying it forces players to use the weapon they don't want to use, and they wish they could just use one specific weapon, and to that I say, I don't know, man, you're really dumb, I think. The point of the system is to be an evolution of what the stance system was. It wants you to be thinking on your feet and adjusting your weapons. It's built to be that. I don't think it's valid criticism to say the game is bad because you just want to use your katana all the time. You just wanted a different game. That's not a critique of the system that exists. It's not flawed because it makes you play the way it was designed to be played. That said, the system isn't that strict either. I often decided not to switch weapons and instead find other methods to use a single weapon, purely out of stubborn convenience, which was both possible and rewarding to achieve too. I think switching weapon is far more for efficiency than necessity, and that's not to say you can totally bypass the system. You do have to play properly, but I think there are ways you can use tools in your own movement to avoid swapping your weapons all of the time, and little elements of creativity go a long way to make a system feel more fun and in the hands of the player. Like Tsushima, tools are used for both stealth and combat, and since we're talking about combat, let's discuss their combat utilization. Bows obviously return, and this time I did get the longbow, so you're welcome, and honestly, it came in very handy against heavily armored guys, but that's far more of a stealth thing. During combat, you're relying on your tools to obscure the vision of enemies, stun them, or finish off stragglers, which I think complements the combat in a similar way to Tsushima without totally breaking things, until the very end when you can still smoke bomb spam and chain assassinate, but by that stage it feels earned rather than something you use from the very get-go to totally destroy any sense of balancing, and I kind of think that's great. It keeps the fun of being able to abuse the AI, but it doesn't grant it until you're in the end game, and so it keeps most of the game well balanced, and by the time you get it, you don't fall back on it constantly because you've learned to play in a new way. It's just a great way to rebalance things without removing elements that, despite being broken, were still fun to do. Guns also add to this. You don't have them for most of the game, and so they don't destroy the balancing either. Once you get guns, they become a necessary part of your arsenal, and if you do return to old areas to finish stuff, well, it just becomes a fun way to dominate the enemy. I think back-ending all of the overpowered shit is a good move, as opposed to just outright removing it, or putting too many restrictions that player agency ends up sacrificed. The one item that did get a straight nerf are the bombs, and look, I think this is probably for the best. They were kind of insane in Tsushima, and in a way that felt dumb rather than fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, doing this shit did make me laugh, and the laugh had value, but I don't think it was worth keeping it in. Bombs are still useful, they still pack a punch, but they aren't broken. The best use of tools, though, in a combat scenario, are the fact tools are now able to be used in boss fights. I said toward the end of Tsushima, the use of tools in bosses would have made more sense. It feels weird to be slaughtering captains, Honor died on the beach, etc., but then you face the chief gamer in a one-on-one battle for some reason. Atsu being able to use her gun, kunai, smokes, bombs, bow, feels great. There's an increased level of dynamism in fights when you can throw some pocket sand, blind your foe, dodge back, pull out your rifle, shoot him right in the face with a shrapnel bullet, and then roll back in to deal sword damage. But it's not totally unbalanced either. There is only a certain amount of times you can use these tools before the enemy becomes wise to them and is able to block them, so you can't spam, you have to switch and be clever about which you use and at what point, so the strategy still remains. The tools create a feeling of playing dirty and cheating while being perfectly balanced and accounted for in the fight, and that's remarkable design. I think this is one of the few areas where I will struggle to go back to Tsushima. Doing those regular duels is gonna feel incredibly bare bones compared to what Yōtei does, and I don't often say that about games. I can usually play all the entries just fine, but with this specifically, especially with how I felt it was something Tsushima needed by Act 3, it's definitely going to be noticeable. And with talk of bosses, let's get into those because I have a fair few things to say. As if I haven't about everything else. One of my biggest criticisms, whether you agree or not, of the duels in Tsushima were attacks that felt like they were either not appropriately telegraphed, or I had no real way to consistently dodge, and there must have been some sort of issue, either in the way telegraphs were taught, or with the issues I raised, because I noticed this 0 times in Yōtei, meaning they fixed something. There was not a single attack I ever felt was bullshit, beyond one that by the end I was perfectly fine with because it worked narratively. It's still a bullshit mechanic, probably, but I'm fine with it for art reasons. We'll talk about it later. I think that's pretty marvelous, that I didn't encounter a single move that I felt was unfair in a whole game. Are you kidding me? There were tough moves, tight timings, some that I really struggled with, but none where I genuinely said to myself, okay, this is just unfair. The game seems to be built with lethal mode in mind from the very start, and it shows, man. This is immaculate combat design, and I think it'll be overlooked for being too good. It works too well to the point that I think people will take this shit for granted. Do you know how hard it is to balance a game this well, to make it this fair and rewarding and also feel incredible to play? This is one of the best action games I think I've ever played. I really don't normally sing a game's praises this much. I like to keep myself a little reserved. I find it easier to go in hard on criticisms, but I genuinely believe Ghost of Yotei has a near flawless combat system that deserves to be recognized. Playing this game on lethal might be the closest I've ever come to reliving the Kingdom Hearts 3 data battles experience. Nothing is ever quite that hard, but the feeling is so similar, but within a totally different framework, and I think that's why it felt so similar, because it was a new beast to conquer. I do have some criticisms though, a few nitpicks, and one thing that I think is a major flaw despite how good I think it is. I just wanted to open with the praise because I think acknowledging how good it is far more important than what I'm about to talk about, despite the criticism also being important to talk about. First off, something more minor. Blue glints sometimes feel a little misplaced. I think Tsushima maybe taught me to tackle them in one way, and half of Yotei also does, that the blue glint means the attack is incoming and signifies the time before an attack starts and an attack lands so you can prep. But in Yotei, it doesn't always work that way. It just signifies the start of an attack, but it can throw you off because the glint is so big by the time the effect is done and you can see the arc of the weapon, it's tough to accurately respond 100% of the time. And you can't know if it's a delayed swing or not until after the attack has been thrown. And with a glint that big, most of the time you just parry as if the attack is coming in a predictable window, and when it's not, you get hit. The only way you can learn those is by repetition and remembering this is the weird delayed one. I have no issue with delayed attacks, they can work and often have good telegraphs, but pairing delayed attacks with glints that don't follow any real pattern and obscure your screen is frustrating because 72.53% of the time, blue glint means parry in 1 second from now. The other 27.47% is parry in 2 or 3 seconds from now, and you can't know which is which when you're blinded by a giant blue lens flare. I think this rears its head too in the fight with the Kitsune at the end of Teshio Ridge. The obscuring of the battlefield, giving you mere moments to check where your foe is and then appropriately react to his potential moves, is insane, and you know what? This one is bullshit. This is a stupid ass fucking fight. How can I know what the attack is? I'm reacting to a glint. I'm reacting to literally a fucking glint. I can't even see him swinging his fucking weapon. The bigger issue though is how Yotei handles health gates. This was a thing in Tsushima too. At a certain point, when a boss's health got low enough, you'd clash swords, say a few epic cinematic words, and their stagger meter would refill, and you'd move on to the next phase of the fight. It was a way to make it so fights were staggered. You'd have to actually learn them and couldn't simply wail on an enemy continuously to blast through their health bar, which I understand and I'm not mad at on a conceptual level. However, in Yotei, they are heavily flawed to the point of genuine frustration. Let me try and explain why. The health gates are so unbelievably rigid that they start to control how you play, especially when you've been on a boss for a while. You know that vaguely around here, the fight will cease for a forced animation, so the next phase can begin. But because the health bar is so vague, you can't be 100% sure ever, and so many times I ended up wasting moves worth 3 spirit or perfect parries that push me straight into the forced animation. One of the things I appreciated in Tsushima is that they'd move these forced animations depending on what you were doing. If you hit a health gate with a perfect parry, you were often allowed to keep dealing damage, and the animation would simply play after. You were still rewarded for playing well. In Yotei, you'll be allowed to keep striking an enemy sometimes, but their health bar does not move, so you'll have to stop and wait, and it kills the flow. On top of this, Tsushima allowed you sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, to bypass the animation simply for better flow of the fight. If you were dealing damage when the animation should play, you get to keep dealing damage, the stagger meter would restore, but the animation wouldn't play and you'd keep going. The phases would switch, but you weren't penalized and the fight remained fun. In Yotei, too often are you worrying about when the animation will play, and so playing reserved and hesitant because you can't know when it's going to kick in. Sure, you could say that's strategy, you save your best moves right after a paired animation, but the best time to use those moves is actually when an enemy is staggered. That's when you're dealing the most damage, and so you either play it safe and use your best moves right after the health gate, or you try and get a perfect parry and it carries you to the next health gate and often wastes part of the move's usage. No matter how you play, you always feel like you're being punished for being good and using the mechanics, and working around a system that aims to screw you over, and staring at a health bar instead of the fight to constantly make sure you're not too close to a potential health gate is annoying and bad. Once you factor in tools, it really starts to become silly how often the game slams on the brakes and says, "Oops, sorry, you were actually playing too well. Time to stop you there. Start again now, please." And it just feels really lame. It reminds me a lot of what Spider-Man 2 did to balance its combat system. Spider-Man 2 has a much fairer combat system than the first game did. You cannot spam gadgets, and the gadgets don't have cheese moves. You actually have to get good, but in doing so, they removed an element of creativity and fun that made Spider-Man 1 such a good time. Sometimes a lack of balance is the cost for a system that is just more fun to play around with, and balancing Spider-Man 2 to me wasn't worth it for what was lost, especially when bosses were not the goal of the fix, but just regular combat, which I think can afford to be a little broken. I think I'd rather the bosses simply had higher health pools in Yōtei than health gating every 4 to 8 hits, because it completely obliterates the flow of bosses, and with a combat system this good, that's such a shame to neuter it like this. But look, I meant what I said at the top of this section. Despite these issues, and they are issues, the bosses are really good. Takezo is tremendous. I can only imagine how fun it could be without the 5 health gates he has stopping you from being the best you can be. The Oni fight was a standout, and the first time I truly felt tested by the game. This was such a rush to beat. In fact, every main member of the Yotei Six had their own unique style to contend with, and I think their fights characterized them far more than some of the actual writing did, which is pretty nice actually. You don't see a lot of games doing that, whether intentional or not. This is honestly a really small chapter, but since I've been numbering the rest, I thought this one has to be numbered 2. But don't let that fool you, I think there's much depth to the stealth. Stealth in this game is really interesting, because at first I felt it was far inferior to Tsushima, and was a little disappointed with how inconvenient it was to use. The detection of enemies is pretty much instant, at least it is on lethal, and it meant you couldn't poke out from grass to quickly take out 2 guys with a chain kill before the detection meter filled. You'd instead have to throw a pot, kill one, and then kill the other, which might be more tactical, but is ultimately just less cool. The thing is though, the stealth is actually far more of a slow burn. Over the course of the game, you gather more charms, more armors, more abilities, and more tools, to the point that by the end game, you are a shadow clearing these camps, using your wolf, the Kusarigama from range, your tools to take out multiple groups of guys at once. It feels so satisfying, and after a game where a lot of the stealth can be hard and a little inefficient, the eventual point you reach is earned in a way Tsushima never could have done. Everything you have in Tsushima is gifted to you from pretty much the start, and you simply gain a few more abilities by the end. Yotei crafts a lot of its growth around becoming better at stealth, as it does with all of your skills and abilities, but stealth is where it really lands in a unique way. The only criticism I think I have is that stealth is not really used as a narrative tool. Atsu is sort of known for doing things without being seen at the start, and her becoming more proficient at stealth isn't really a part of the story or a character journey. It's a really well executed gameplay creep that has no bearing on the actual story of the game, which isn't inherently a problem, it's just weird how well it's done for no contextual reason. I honestly don't have much more to say on stealth, I think. I love this shit. Level design is superior, progression slaps other than how it can obviously be improved, but we went over that. The actual mechanical shit is great. Well, I think that's everything on a design and mechanical front that I actually wanted to talk about. I'm not sure how much of the video's runtime that took up, but I'd imagine a fair bit. I think I probably covered everything in a way I wanted to. That said, I'll probably remember something after this video goes out, or a comment will address something that I forgot, but that's how these things go. Striving for perfection is endless. At a point, you gotta pack it up and be happy. This is irrelevant. Let's move on to narrative, which is an interesting thing to tackle because I've seen various opinions on this game's story, and its story as well as its structure is something I have a lot of thoughts on. So let's knuckle down and begin dissecting the story, character work, and themes of Ghost of Yotei. I'm going to try and split this section into smaller sections so it makes it easier to tackle without having to go perfectly chronologically, and also so everything gets untangled properly, because a lot of what Yōtei has to say is woven together really delicately, so we're going to pull on the threads until they come apart for us. The basis of this game is Atsu, and I've already established how the opening fumbles a lot of our introduction to the story in ways that could have been more subtle or substituted, but regardless of that, it lays the groundwork. The night of the burning tree is the night her parents were slaughtered for no reason by a group of evil men who were known as the Yotei Six. This is what we learn from her perspective, a childlike perspective with no room for nuance, a perspective she has latched onto and built her entire life around. Her pain is a major component, and it's important that we feel that, and I think over the course of the game they managed to achieve that. It's maybe not done as well as other stories, because ultimately we never really knew these people. It's hard to care for them in the same way we could for someone like Joel from The Last of Us, but I think it serves its purpose, and it does create a sense of connection, and it does this through familiar locations. On the map, beginning at Atsu's childhood home and extending to other places across Eizo, we can, with the touch of a button, transport ourselves back in time to see this place through the eyes of a younger Atsu, when her family was whole and when she was happier. Because of this, Yōtei is far less one establishing moment and more of a slow burn as you feel her out as you progress. As you explore, as you complete stories, as you get deeper into her hunt, you understand her more as a person and the pain that molded her, and I think that's wonderful. It's again why I think the intro is so rough. You could have cut a lot and left who she is and what she's doing as a semi-mystery that we piece together as we play. The most important component of her pain is that she is ready to die. She believes she already did. On the night her entire family was killed, she died, the Onryo was born, and once she avenges her family, she too will end her life and join them. It's a compelling setup because you know from the start that the game won't end that way, but it's a matter of how we get there that's intriguing, and as we learn more about who Atsu was, it hurts more seeing her as this person without personhood, the total endpoint of what it is to be a ghost. The wolf is a major component of the game, and the first chapter is even titled The Lone Wolf. Atsu's father called both her and her brother Jubei twin wolves. It's a major motif in the game, with the wolf pack being a major mechanic also, people you meet becoming part of this ever-growing screen of friends. The thing I really like about this is how the wolf mirrors Atsu, and how a lone wolf is actually the perfect thing to use. In nature, lone wolves don't naturally exist, at least not in the way we think of them in pop culture. Wolves naturally live in packs, they are always with family, they rely on each other, alone they wither and die. Wolves that are found alone in the wild intentionally is during a period called dispersal, and they do so in order to find a mate and form new packs, to find a new home to thrive as a group. Wolves do not naturally live alone, their time alone is a time of transition with the only end goal being finding new belonging. I think this symbolism is so beautifully done because it also kind of requires knowledge of the living world to properly work. The game never spells this out, but it's something I think even without true knowledge of random nature facts, you can kind of piece together too. I mean, I didn't casually just know all of this. I understood lone wolves are kind of a myth and had to look up the facts to back up my analysis. As much as I may seem like the smartest person alive in these videos, I actually am only maybe second or third. Atsu is going against her nature by becoming a lone wolf. Not one that seeks out the living, but that lives purely for herself, in isolation, to seek death. And even the wolf dens work to reinforce this. The wolf leads you to other trapped wolves. It's trying to help its friends. It's not doing what it's doing for selfish reasons or revenge. It's out of love to fight for the living rather than the dead, which Atsu doesn't understand, or at least doesn't consciously. In fact, every time she sees a wolf den, she follows it to get revenge for the wolf, only to eventually find another wolf trapped at this place the wolf has led her to, meaning the wolf is leading her there to save the person that is there, not to get revenge because of the other ones that died, which is a flip on what Atsu is doing for herself. And so everything you do in this world, like I said in the section about contextualization of the open world, is in order to find Atsu's reason to be again, her humanity, to reconnect with her home and the people of it, and ultimately to reconnect with herself. It's why the Wolfpack mechanic exists, because she naturally forms these bonds with the people she meets, people who want to help her, and that she wants to help too. Her nature is something that she actually can't avoid, especially as she begins to reconnect with who she is at her core, and the humanity that is core to all of us. I think the only issue I take with the Wolfpack system is that, first of all, it's not actually a system, it's just a screen of character artwork, but second of all, these people don't actually know each other. Jin had a stronger Wolfpack than Atsu has, with his friends actually interacting and helping each other during pivotal moments. Atsu's friends never help each other or even seem to be aware of each other's existence. The only three that do are our three central characters in Jubei, Oyuki, and Kiku. The rest, though, are just glorified NPCs, and look, the Wolfpack screen does help to reinforce the themes, but it's ultimately incredibly shallow outside of that. The thing is, by the time you realise what the game is doing and what it's trying to say, you still have so much game to go. I think it was midway through the Ishikari Plains arc I realised all of this and the trajectory of the game, and so I spent the rest, all of the following Oni arc, Takachi Range, Teshio Ridge, and Oshima Coast, waiting for Atsu to catch up to where I was at. And despite some moments here and there, it can be a little too slow of a burn when you already know where the game is going to take you, but the character is still going through the motions. It doesn't help either with the structure being the way it is in Chapter 1. The fact things are so open, the fact that you can go any which way you want, stops major arcs from interacting with each other and stops Atsu from having meaningful and gradual growth. She has to remain static to a degree because you could do any of these main story missions in any order you want. Hell, you could head to Teshio Ridge, get halfway through the Kitsune, and then decide to fuck off back to Ishikari Plains and do the Oni first before continuing. Maybe have a mosey around Takachi Range as well. This is the issue with how Chapter 1 handles its structure, the absolute plateau of Atsu's character work. The first major arc, if you're not a complete idiot, we'll get into the true weeds of why once I'm done with this chapter, is Ishikari Plains and the hunt for the Oni, a hunt characterized by hate and rage and an enemy that is simply a set of raiders, bandits, the most obvious and classic set of foes. It gives us a simple antagonist as the backdrop to a story where Atsu discovers her dead brother is alive after being shot point blank with a gun off a cliff, but don't worry, that he built a life for himself as a samurai, as Lord Kitamori. This uses Jubei to reflect on Atsu's unconscious search for her personhood. A part of her, who she thought was dead, is not. He survived, and he didn't just do that, he lived. Jubei is a literal embodiment of the idea that not everything she thought died, and parts of her that she buried were in fact still hanging on, which reawakens core parts of who she is. I think this is also just handled and written kind of flawlessly. I didn't expect Kitamori was Jubei. If anything, I thought he was just hitting on her, and the way they interact, the way it shifts Atsu's outlook but doesn't immediately change it is so real because she's lived most of her life without him, and despite dedicating her life to avenging her family, this doesn't suddenly change that. It's not gonna flip a switch because she doesn't actually know this man. They simply share memories from years ago when they were both children. To her, she still lost her brother for all of those years. It takes effort to get to know someone, to let them in, and this arc doesn't automatically do that. It just sows those seeds and begins to lower Atsu's guard, to bring out the little girl that still lives inside. Ishikari Plains is also the best region in the game. It's the most focused and most cohesive, and every single element of the story plays into the core story being told here. Like I said, with the Fox quests, the guy living out in the wait, did I fucking mention this earlier in the script? Oh god, maybe? Anyway, the guy living out in the woods alone, stuck in a hole but needing help, and them both freeing a stuck fox together, and it represents Atsu needing to let others in, or letting the soldier who was attacked by raiders desert the samurai to find his family who need him, to let go of duty for love. Even the undying samurai tells the story of a vain lord trapped within his armor thanks to a fire that bestowed on him unnatural life, a life Atsu has to end so that he can rest, both foreshadowing her own end as the Onryo and Saito's end at the place where the burning tree started the game's narrative, with the undying samurai's armor being a metaphor for the armor Atsu has placed around her heart. Ishikari Plains is wonderful, and while other regions don't totally break cohesion, this area is the most focused of the bunch, and Atsu is torn between her given purpose to avenge her family and natural inclination to be drawn to the brother she already mourned. Teshio is the area I felt was the weakest. It thematically works, everything that happens here is perfectly functional and in line with the game's core themes, but it's not anywhere near as emotionally resonant. It's one of the reasons the character tales in Tsushima didn't work, because while they were functional as companions to the game's theming, they were boring or shallow, and therefore the player didn't care about them. Teshio is not that bad, but it suffers from similar issues, that it struggles to make the player care deeply, or at least it felt that way for me. This region doesn't have as clear an enemy as the Oni. Rather than raiders, we are facing shinobi, the Nine-Tails twisted by Saito to meet his own ends. On paper, they are more nuanced. In practice, they are just raiders who hide in bushes. Because the game is focused on Saito and his ends, there's a little room for ideological difference between each gang that's tied to the Yōtei Six, but there's more to be said on that a little later. This arc focuses on a character called Oyuki, who we discover was the Kitsune. The current one is a new guy. She was the one who was there on the night of the burning tree. The issue here, for me, was that I kind of clocked this from the very moment we see the Kitsune, that it was a different guy. They established two different armor types, which immediately differentiates past and present, something that they haven't really done prior, and Ayuki is very obviously a sneaky character. I knew that in some way she must have had ties to the Nine Tails, and by the time we reach the boss fight, it's been so obvious for so long that something is up that the reveal doesn't really feel like a reveal. It's patronizing, honestly. Like, yeah, man, I know. It's so played out, it's so cringe, and also here we just find out withheld information that the Kitsune actually defied Saito that night and told Atsu to run, which we didn't know prior to finding out that Ayuki was the Kitsune, which feels purposefully placed to flip our perspective, but Atsu would have already known this information. We just didn't, purely to keep us in the dark about the Kitsune, which is just a bit lame and lacks the sophistication that was so present within Ishikari Plains. Everything that follows is solid, not incredible, but solid. Learning of Ayuki's past, of the person before we discover she's the Kitsune, is important to understand her as a human being, the person behind the mask, and that in turn acts as a way to mirror Atsu. She is more than the Onryo, more than the mask she wears, and forgiving Ayuki is like forgiving herself, which is a major component of her journey. I think Dojun being a pupil who just, like, went evil is, I guess, supposed to mirror Atsu, maybe? Like, she could become like Dojun if unchecked? I don't really know. It struck me way more as like a Jack the Lad from Assassin's Creed Syndicate's hit DLC Jack the Ripper situation, and felt like they were trying to do way too much in a short space of time. Again, it's thematically functional, but emotionally really void of substance or depth. I do not care about Dojun. If you do, you are a liar and need to be tried in court. Teshio is harmed by how large and tedious this area gets. While Ishikari was an area I cleared just naturally, Teshio was not, and so the world itself becomes cumbersome and the main quests become disparate. I think this comes from most of the main quests taking place at the bottom of the map, so most of the region becomes areas you will not travel to, and we're left with a similar situation to what befell Act 2 in Tsushima. It takes a punch out of the moments that matter because everything feels far more disconnected. Like I said, this area is the most Tsushima the game becomes, and the further away from my initial playthrough I get, the more I really think this area was rough and could have done with a lot of reworking, both in terms of size, writing, and design. One of my favourite areas in the game, though, was the Neoro Wilds, that sits as a transitional arc between Ishikari and Teshio, and works as deep character reflection for Atsu. This area is in Ainu territory, the native people of this land, free from industry or modern society, living off the land in tribes that stick together and work together in harmony with nature. There's a vibe in this region that is truly like no other in the game, and the area sticks with me for that very reason. It's phenomenal atmospherically. I found myself a few times just traveling back here to sit and listen and vibe, and I think for a video game world to do that, not just in the moment, but to be desired by the player, is pretty powerful, especially with how well that works thematically. Now, there's the obvious elephant in the room here that Yōtei does not try to tackle or deconstruct who the Ainu are, and I don't particularly blame it. The colonization of Japan and suppression of its native people is something people don't particularly know about, and is something Japan tries not to acknowledge. I mean, the more you look into the history Japan tries to cover up, the fucking worse it gets. Their insanely successful rebrand post-World War II needs to be fucking studied, and probably has, to be fair. I mean, even somewhere like the United States tries not to acknowledge the atrocities of colonization, but we're at least aware they happened. It's something that isn't talked about as much as it should be, but we all fucking know. With regards to Japan, it's far, far more suppressed, and was so much longer ago that it's easier to ignore, and until playing the game and writing this video, I was actually unaware this was even the case. That the Ainu are a real group of people who are native to this part of Japan, with the Ryukyuan being native to the Okinawa Islands in the south. The suppression of the native people, at the time the Jomon, by settlers from likely Korea and maybe China in around 300 CE, was a slow process, and at first it was simply settlers bringing agriculture and resources, and while there was tension, it wasn't a full-on slaughter. However, over time, as the Jomon and Yayoi intermixed and/or were displaced, the Yamato ethnicity was gradually formed, which makes up around 98% of what we think of as Japanese people. This is generally just a normal cultural melding, though, and was a very long time ago. The Ainu, though, are the last remnants of the original Jomon culture, and over the following centuries, and specifically when Yōtei takes place, they were displaced, pushed out from their lands, and often killed when they fought back. And there are still Ainu people in Japan today, and slowly they are getting more recognition, but they're still looked down on, bullied as kids, and given very little of what was originally their home. They're seen as lesser. I don't blame Yōtei for not tackling this. It's a fucking intense topic with a lot of history and nuance, and to throw that much into a game that isn't about that would be really difficult. But what it does do is handle their culture with respect, represents them and their history, and allowed me to look further into something I never would have otherwise, and for that I think it's deeply valuable. This area though, using its side quests, work to somewhat deconstruct Atsu's lone wolf persona. Huchi, an elder of the Ainu people, works as a direct mirror to Atsu. Her son has lost touch with her because she insists on doing everything herself, on being independent, and he asks Atsu to help her, to accompany her, to make sure she doesn't get hurt, and in doing so, we begin to understand her as a person, and deeper understand ourselves too. Both Atsu and Huchi can see the flaws in the other, but cannot see the flaws within themselves. Huchi refers to Atsu only as Sitarainu, meaning one who is easily lost in the hunt, and Atsu continues to help Huchi because she understands the importance in leaning on others, yet neither seem to identify these things about themselves, until the end where Huchi does realize her errors and sees the importance of her community she's neglected, and that there's always more to learn. The side quest The Load We Bear has Atsu help Huchi save a bear cub who's lost its mother. The tribe bands together to offer the cub a home and to raise it as a community, to give it the life it wouldn't have had if left alone in the woods, yet another reflective moment on where Atsu is headed and what she requires too.
Every lone wolf needs a pack.
I think it's clearer than ever now how doing this all out of order would be fucking insane. Imagine going from your home in the grasslands straight to Naoro Wilds. Doing the Oni after Naoro would be mental, and that's not even to speak about doing Teshio before Ishikari. Imagine doing Teshio, learning about the Kitsune, learning about Oyuki, accepting her, exploring that nuance. You also have to do Naoro to get to Teshio, so you've already had the reflective arc, and then going back into a rage-fueled arc in Ishikari where you do not tell your brother you know who the Kitsune is, only to afterwards meet up with him at your home where the Kitsune shows up and you say, "Oh yeah, sorry, I just never mentioned, despite my rage I displayed about wanting to kill the entire Yōtei Six, I already befriended one of them weeks ago, I just never fucking said anything." It leaves Atsu at a disadvantage morally, and also would make Jubei far more justified in keeping Kiku from Atsu, which is meant to be a moment Jubei reconsiders whether it was right when Atsu is offended, but she has no ground to stand on if she kept the Kitsune from him. If you do Teshio first, it just proves him correct to do so. Being non-linear is only a detriment to the game. This is artistically horrendous, and seems to only exist to market the idea of freedom because people value that concept in open-world games. But when these games are not built from the ground up with the idea of pure open-endedness in mind, it only harms the experience. I mean, look at this tweet from PlayStation. What order did you do the Yōtei Six? I don't know, man. There are literally 2 orders, and the only difference is swapping these 2 around. What the fuck are you talking about? It proves that AAA games are shackled to corporate greed even when they're good, and while the game tries to guide you in a certain direction, it doesn't force you, and so you end up with one path that is obviously correct and one that is objectively stupid. And the fact you can do these in any order actively harms Atsu because she cannot develop in major ways until Chapter 1 is complete, and so she has to remain pretty static across both arcs, and that has impact on Chapters 2 and 3 trying to do more development in a shorter window that should have been handled across Chapter 1 more evenly. The game does make Oni to Kitsune the obvious progression in a character sense, and honestly doesn't hugely compromise on that, but there are concessions made by the fact the game has to be non-linear. There's a glass ceiling of character development possible pre-Chapter 2, and the potential for someone to do these in a stupid order is why. Before we move on to talking about Chapters 2 and 3, I wanted to take a second to deconstruct the Yōtei Six themselves a little, to talk about Saito, the gangs, the members and their goals, and the possible political and social commentary that was so prominent in Tsushima that goes kinda amiss in Yōtei and is one of the game's weakest links. Ultimately, these guys are kinda shallow. They facilitate Atsu's growth and arc, but they do so by having little substance to contribute to the game thematically. Where I justified the decision to make Kuten a pretty shallow villain in Tsushima, I won't do the same here. Kuten was shallow for a reason, and worked as a motivator for the game to work. The real commentary and depth was with regards to the samurai and the world Jin lived in. Yōtei doesn't do this. Saito and his gang are evil guys, and the Matsumai and samurai are your allies who help to bring peace, which is a little weird given there are aspects of the game that push back against this idea, that have crumbs of further depth, but the game doesn't actually act on any of this or make it a part of the story. There are interesting starts to deconstructions of some of these characters, such as how the Oni treats his people, the order he creates, and the morale he builds. When you enter that camp, you see him from a slightly different angle, but an angle that does not become something the game tackles. Because they redeem Ayuki and make her nuanced, Dojun of course has to be just an evil guy doing evil shit so that we can have a boss fight and it can punctuate Ayuki's arc. We cannot explore him in more detail, such as why exactly he's like this, what caused it, why does he desire Saito's approval. Instead, he is a faceless NPC that represents the thing Ayuki needs to destroy within herself, but no more than that. The dragon is barely a character, the snake is just a seedy drunk guy that you kill, and the spider is maybe the most nuanced, but even then it boils down to him helping you out to spite his father. There's little depth to actually be explored by his actions towards Atsu by this point. Saito as a guy has a lot of room for nuance, a lot of room for deeper examination of his actions, but the game just doesn't do it. The closest we get are in his missives, letters you collect by completing camps that speak to his humanity, his reason for doing everything. He believes the samurai are actively opposed to the freedoms of the people and are a detriment to Japan and everyone living there. It's maybe taken to an extreme, but it's just an extension of what Tsushima began to critique, the idea the samurai squeeze people for all their worth and reap the benefits. Saito, in these missives, speaks about the actual moral motivations for his fight against the Matsumai, and that's really interesting stuff that the game actively ignores. The only area I can think of that the game actually tries to critique the Matsumai and give a different angle to Saito's gang is that they will take on women and all who are willing to fight for a cause, whereas the samurai won't and are rooted in tradition. But outside of this, and the missives and set instances like entering the Oni's fort, the Yōtei Six and their gang are just evil guys. Most people hate them, they are treated like invaders and oppressors like the Mongols, they have evil bandit camps you have to liberate, and you actively work with the samurai to do so. The game seems to be at odds with what Tsushima was saying politically, it's so strange. I understand the game is far more focused on Atsu's personal journey, and that's fine, but it's bizarre to me that the game disregards any of Saito's actual motives. Outside of the missives, he is just cruel and barbaric and no different from Kutan Khan, and maybe that's the point, but it's not very interesting, because ultimately, the only commentary the game lands on is not to disrupt the status quo, which... It's a similar situation to a lot of antagonists like this that have potentially interesting motives, but their actions are so extreme to the point that they cannot be justified, and any nuanced messaging gets lost in the process. Does Saito have interesting points? Sure, but the game can't unpack them because he's too busy doing a crusade of evil shit with a literal army of people who are raiding and killing, and so anything interesting there could be to dissect is overshadowed by the fact he's kinda just an evil fucking bloke. There's also a sense of impermanence to any of the actions taken, which works to dampen the fallout from either the samurai's actions or Saito's. For example, in Oshima, after Saito attacks Matsumai Castle, it's treated like it's been taken. Atsu even says this to Kiku, that the castle fell, but there isn't any consequence to this. This was what Saito was fighting for the entire game, and yet it doesn't feel like he actually achieved anything. You can return to the castle because you need to be able to do the side quest still, and it's fine. The roof is damaged and you can no longer go inside, but beyond that, it seems to be completely normal. I guess the samurai just took it back. The game seems so uninterested in unpacking any of the actual war, any of Saito's goals or motives or emotions or his underlings' motives either, nor does the game really care about defending or critiquing the samurai either. They're just allies because they are, and the Yōtei Six are hollow motivators for Atsu's arc and nothing more. Saito killed her father, and did what he did to send a message because his clan was dissolved by the shogun and Atsu's father deserted him, and it convinced others to do the same, and as their numbers dwindled, people starved and died, and he blamed Atsu's father and so killed him and his whole family and decided to pin a little girl to a burning tree and leave her to die. There is no justification to this. There is no way to spin this so that you can understand why he'd do it. It's just needlessly cruel and doesn't even feel logical. Atsu's naive and childlike view of what happened that night is proven to actually be true. She is right to seek revenge. She is right to wipe these people out because they have no nuance and they are not redeemable, except for the one that is, because she was actually good all along. Something I really hoped the game would do early on was create a direct thematic link between Saito's gang and Jin's fight. Not a literal link, I didn't want or expect Saito to be a descendant of Jin or like an actual evolution of his exact group, but that ideologically there was a link there. Saito is Jin's fight for freedom and equality taken to the extreme, and when that happens, when the fight against tyranny becomes tyranny, despite Saito doing what he's doing for the greater good, individuals like Atsu must rise up to stop it. I thought this would have been really interesting, to slowly learn that Saito and his gang started out kind of as heroes in a way, started out the way that Jin did, but slowly became intoxicated by power or just felt their ends justified their means, that getting rid of the samurai was right at the cost of innocent lives, similarly to Avalanche in Final Fantasy VII, maybe finding themselves lost in the source a little bit. But the game doesn't do this. It doesn't really do anything. I feel like this is a topic I could sit and discuss for hours, to be honest, but it's an area I feel really let down by. Tsushima has a clear message, and despite Yōtei being a more personal journey, one that didn't need to focus on the same messaging, it ignores it entirely, and feels like at points it actively disagrees with it, but not in concrete ways where it makes an argument, just by positioning you as a friend of the samurai and an enemy of the would-be liberators with little to no commentary on either position in the fight. Chapter 2, the Onryo, begins after 35 hours because most of the game is Chapter 1. I think it's funny when games are split into acts or chapters, but one is so much bigger than the rest. It's not really like an actual flaw, but when the Chapter 2 title card hit, I did forget this game had chapters at all. This section of the video may jump around a little, but hopefully it'll all tie up by the end. Maybe it won't and it'll suck, I don't know, I can't win them all. Chapter 2 takes us to Oshima Coast, where the core focus here is around Jubei's secret daughter, Kiku. I'm not entirely sure when this child was born, or even if she's biologically his daughter, because we don't learn anything about her mother, and Jubei looks like, what, 11 here? Maybe a bit older, and Kiku seems to be about 12 or 13, maybe a tad younger, and I just don't really understand how or when he would have had a kid without having been extremely young himself, given it's 16 years between the Night of the Burning Tree and the present day, which means he would have had a kid at 14? I guess Kiku is younger than she looks, and to be fair, I am historically terrible at being able to tell kids' ages. None of this matters, by the way, I don't really care, I just got a little fixated and won't delete this from the script. I said this earlier, but Jubei keeping Kiku from Atsu works as a pretty tremendous turning point for Atsu to understand he didn't tell her because he's concerned about her way of life, and this chapter has a lot of Jubei trying to shield Kiku, while Atsu tries to suggest this is just what life is, and she needs to find out sooner rather than later to survive. It's not until Kiku is forced to see the world through Atsu's eyes that she realizes the error in that sentiment, and to take her back to the night her innocence was stolen too. Kiku represents this wonderful symbol of Atsu's innermost self, the girl she was before everything happened to her, and the war backdrop of the Shima Coast consuming Kiku's home is a brilliant use of open worlds and creates a real sense of tone and focus. Not as good as Ishigari in my opinion, it has issues as we've discussed, but it's narratively cohesive regardless. The flower moment is goofy though. Oh, this flower represents patience, and this one represents evil revenge! Which one are you gonna pick? So much of this chapter revolves around Atsu getting to know her niece, getting to know this little girl who reflects herself, and through nurturing Kiku, she nurtures who she was, and finally gives her a reason to look ahead, but also a way to look back. Kiku seeing the Onryo is a way for Atsu, the younger version inside her, to see the person she's become, to see the ghost and how monstrous it can be, which is an interesting juxtaposition to how Tsushima framed the idea of a ghost, which is something else this chapter does too. Waiting until this late in the game to use Jin is actually a really good idea, for multiple reasons. First reason is contextual mirroring. Jin's game took place during an ongoing conflict and war, and this section of the game is a literal war, so that's a fun piece of mirroring, but more importantly, now this moment doesn't just mean something to the player, it's not just a fun reference, it also means something to Atsu as well. I don't think I've had an experience quite like this since Assassin's Creed Revelations. Now don't get me wrong, this is not nearly as narratively strong as Assassin's Creed Revelations, I just mean it gave me the same tingles that that game did in 2011 when Ezio followed in the footsteps of Altair, that idea of unknowingly communicating across centuries. And after 40-ish hours now with Atsu, seeing her journey and being able to subconsciously contrast it with Jin's, having his story be something she learns means something for her own growth, to understand what a ghost can be, but also what it can cost too. I want to take a second too to amend something I said in the Tsushima video with regards to the line about Khuten Khan, because after playing this quest, it actually clicked for me. I made fun of Jin saying in response to Khuten's line, "We will be remembered, no, you will be forgotten," because it felt like a thin justification for why Khuten doesn't exist in history despite the game actively avoiding historical accuracy and had no significance outside of that, but I actually disagree with that now and think it makes perfect sense. All Khuten cared about was being remembered, being seen as a king or emperor or god, that history would know his name and his deeds, but Jin shoots all that down by saying he will instead be forgotten, and he was. Jin too was also forgotten, but only in name. Jin Sakai is not mentioned once, nor is Clan Sakai. only a ghost, a hero, someone who fought for the little man. And so legacy is more than your name being etched into stone. It's about how your actions speak for you, which only would have made an ideological link between Jin and Saito more meaningful, but alas, it was not to be. It sucks too because there's actually a direct link made. Jin was the first shinobi, which is a bit complex and does throw some larger questions into the mix, as the shinobi and samurai were often linked and complementary to one another rather than opposing, so I'm a little unsure why they decided to make this the case, given Jin's entire fight seemed to work as a counterbalance to the samurai, and I could spend a whole while breaking down what that means for Jin, but it would ultimately be conjecture. The point I wanted to make here is that the Ninetales, who are part of Saito's gang under the control of the Kitsune, are a warped band of shinobi, ones who broke away to serve Saito. And so there actually is a literal direct link from Jin to Saito, and they still did nothing with it, which is kind of mad. What this does do, though, in a really funny and probably unintentional way, although maybe not, is give all the godforsaken fox dens from Tsushima deeper meaning. The Ninetales are descended from Jin, who has loads of fox motifs going on in this quest. I mean, you even follow this very cool black fox, which symbolizes Jin himself, and I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of campy, but in a good way. I like this. The quest itself is also really tasteful. I don't think I love the forced combat, the fact they had to shove in this obnoxious Ninetales guy because the game has to have combat every 3 minutes, but it does also show how the sword and the ability you get from the sword, Dance of Wrath, is not simply granted because of titles. Being a member of the Ninetales is superseded by Atsu being more deserving of the sword, which is very in line with Jin's own beliefs. Everything else here is just so well done. It could have been cringe and over the top, but I think it's really nice. The home with all the little memorabilia, the haiku speaking to Jin's pain but also his pride, and finally the grave overlooking the sea. All of this is capped off by the legend of the ghost, and I think this quest is wonderfully placed during this arc to bring us back to the distinctive difference between the ghost and the Onryo. I said at the very top of the video that the wording being this specific was intentional. Tsushima uses the word ghost, whereas Yōtei almost exclusively uses the term Onryo. The difference here is that the ghost became a symbol, one the people could rally behind in a time of war and turmoil in the face of the selfish acts of the samurai. The Onryo is a vengeful spirit, one of many, not a symbol, not the ghost, just a ghost. The game actually doesn't even work as a direct critique of Jin, or even a reflection of him. Instead, the game is an exploration of someone else who came back from the dead, and how different circumstances and different times can mold that journey incredibly differently. Jin's journey is about his samurai self dying on the beach so he can discover who he always was, and that takes the form of the ghost. That is Jin Sakai and who he always was. He just sheds vanity to get down to the core of himself. Yōtei is about a girl who felt she was forced to become an Onryo, how cruelty and pain and trauma molded her into a vengeful spirit, but how despite that, she can find humanity again, and that she is not an Onryo at all. She is Atsu, and she deserves a second chance. The game uses the concept of a ghost as a vehicle to explore trauma, and how that can warp someone's sense of self. The moment you confront the spider, the moment you unlock the ghost stance, is probably even better than Tsushima in my absolute honest opinion. Atsu takes up a mask, one broken but pieced back together with gold, an old Japanese tradition called kintsugi. It's a practice in which old ceramics are repaired with very obvious golden joinery in place of the cracks. The idea is that the cracks and breaks are part of the object's spiritual history and should be celebrated as a show of age and beauty, rather than them being hidden away and pretending they didn't happen. Embracing imperfection as beauty, a concept rooted in the philosophy of wabi-sabi. I love this shit, man. It's such a tremendous piece of symbolism for the journey Atsu has been on, and allows the next scene where Kiku sees Atsu through a new perspective as one where she too is able to see her as a flawed and imperfect person. But despite that, still, the aunt she loves. And through that lens, Atsu is too able to notice this about herself, and from that, begin to find acceptance. Despite this chapter having a super goofy name, yuck! What the fuck? Despite this chapter having a super goofy name, yuck! No, I'm not doing another take. I do think most everything comes together here well, if a little rushed in places and shallow in areas that we already discussed. Closing off chapter 2, we get the moment where Atsu decides to head after the dragon and spider rather than going with Jubei to help Kiku and Ayuki in the castle. I think this is handled great. It honestly took me by surprise because I was certain this is where she'd flip a switch and realize the path she was on, but instead she doubles down, abandons her current family who could die for her quest to avenge the last. No longer is this about her mission, but clearly about her obsession and how her trauma is melded to her very sense of self in a way she cannot untangle. Doing this leads to Ayuki and Jubei being captured, as Saito is using them both to try and find where Atsu is and to potentially lure her in. Atsu finds Kiku though. She went to the shrine nearby that was part of a quest earlier on where I realised that, spoilers, Jubei would die. The reason being, they have this heartfelt conversation here where you do a song based on each of the 3 core allies, and it meant to me that one of them was definitely dying. It wouldn't be Kiku because she's too core to the future, it wouldn't be Ayuki because realistically she's the one you care about the least, so it had to be Jubei. There's a reason why it works too, and I'll talk about that when we get to it at the end. This is where consequence becomes apparent, and Atsu genuinely, for the first time, truly regrets her actions. That she did the wrong thing, and that she's simply glad Kiku was safe. The moment where it hits, the moment where it all clicked so nicely for me, was Atsu being awoken by Kiku's screams that made her worry, panic, and jump into action. But the reality was that Kiku was swinging a stick, calling for the death of Saito and training for that fight. And in this moment here is where Atsu sees herself, the little girl who pledged her life to violence because her family was taken. The fight against Saito that she dreams of all the time when you sleep at camp, and a cycle that will repeat if Atsu didn't give up her quest for death to help her family now. I think this works tremendously, because Chapter 2 is so dedicated to exploring Kiku, and because Chapter 1 did such a good job with Jubei. Ayuki is kind of sidelined here, her arc is done, she supports the story, but she's kind of a little bit inconsequential from here on out, she's just sort of there because she has to be, but I can't pretend I care that deeply about her as a person the same way I do for Jubei or Kiku. I think what doesn't help the game, and doesn't help this moment, is that Atsu doing things that hurt people isn't actually something she grapples with until now. Her actions, even when selfish, are usually beneficial to everyone, which is why they start leaving gifts for the Onryo. Atsu never has to worry about how she's affecting other people until now, and I think that makes it feel a little more sudden. It would have been nice if over the course of the game, similar to Edward from Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, she was doing things that were maybe at first broadly beneficial to people, but slowly, as she made connections, began to hurt them, and her selfishness became more apparent. One of the core aspects of critique toward the Onryo in this game is that the people are mistaken, that Atsu's actions only coincidentally help people, and that's interesting, but they actually always help people, other than this one moment in the game where she loses Jubei and Ayuki, and the first time she harms someone else, she decides, oh damn, I was being stupid. And I think it comes across as shallow, even if the work done with Kiku is actually good. The thing is that Atsu's moment of realization isn't really here either, and it's not gradual, it's actually the next quest. This is where I think things feel rushed. I don't agree that the major beats are rushed, I think they're handled well in Chapter 3, but here things feel a little quick. You return to Hanbei because he's one of the best old bounty hunters Atsu knows to see if he has any idea where the spider went so that she can question him about Jubei and Ayuki, and Hanbei is like, well, I guess you could try their family cemetery since his brother died, that sounds like a good idea, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, good point. This is also where Hanbei suggests the idea that revenge is Saito's weakness for the first time in the entire game. Until this point, I genuinely hadn't even considered the game felt that way about Saito. His disdain for Atsu felt pragmatic more than anything else. It never felt like revenge in a personal sense, and the same with what he did to her family. I mean, we already established that was just kind of batshit. I think his motives are lame and shallow, and almost trying to do a Last of Us Part 2, but flip it the other way, that killing people can be good, but only for the correct reasons rather than deploring any violence. Not to boil down either game to such basic terms, but I think whether you like The Last of Us 2 or not, it's far easier to justify what Abby did to Joel than to justify what Saito did to Atsu, and it doesn't even try to justify it, so it's really just shallow. It's saying that he just loves revenge and can't help himself, and that makes him weak, so Atsu should fight for something other than revenge, which is all basically done in this very conversation. I honestly think you could make this flow a lot more naturally if you remove the conversation with Hanbei. I think the prior scene with Kiku does a better job of conveying her switch in motivation, and it would make her sparing of the spider seem like it came from a more implied introspection, while retaining the shock and impact because of the scene with Kiku, rather than because Hanbei just told her that the sash is just ink and the path isn't set in stone, or whatever he says, in the scene before, which too obviously sets up a shift from Atsu. Again, it's the game trying too hard to spoon-feed, and it makes it seem dumber when, without this conversation, the development is implied, rather than some divine wisdom she is just told up front. Also, Atsu is a great bounty hunter, and after all the bounties we've done, I think she probably could have worked out where to find the spider also. This conversation is just contrived to exist so Atsu can be told to change. Once we find and fight the spider, a fight I had considerable trouble with, not because it's bullshit, it's really fucking good, but just because it was crazy hard, Atsu spares him, like I said, which works despite the shit scene with Hanbei, showing she truly is more interested in finding her family. What feels odd, though, is how the spider just does betray Saito. Like, yeah, I guess Saito did show complete apathy when the dragon died, and it's showing how even the members who aren't Oyuki clearly have a level of humanity beneath their mask, which is why he's not wearing it here, but also, it does just come out of spite for Saito, which feels contradictory thematically. He's really just a vehicle to get us to the fortress, and it feels rushed and hollow too, rather than genuinely cathartic. This is the point where we head into the end game and get an obnoxious point of no return message. Points of no return could be a whole video topic unto themselves, and maybe one day I'll do that, but I do find them usually very lame. A big pop-up telling you the story will end soon sucks, and really destroys any sense of immersion in the story. Why do you have to warn me the game is ending soon? Sometimes they do this because you'll be locked out of side quests, and I have issues with that too, because if you're locked out of side quests, it's usually because somebody dies, and if you're warned, then you're kinda prepared for somebody to die, and that takes the punch out of it, and quests being left unfinished kinda makes the impact even better. It uses game terms like unfinished quests in your quest log to convey that feeling of words left unsaid that lingers after somebody close to you dies. But games have to be designed this way for completionist's sake, and I don't know, man, I don't like it. If your art is harmed in any way, whether you think it's a nitpick or not because of something tied to a trophy in a menu, then that sucks. In this instance, though, you don't actually lose anything. This is just a message telling you the ending of the game is going to happen for some reason. It's doubly fucking stupid. I don't have much interesting to say about the fortress. It's a cool set-piece stealth sequence, and reuniting with Jubei and Oyuki turns out to have been a trap set so that Saito could lure Atsu away from her home, for some reason. I mean, if he knew that's where she was, why didn't he just go there? The only difference here is that I guess they have to rush back hoping he hadn't killed Kiku, so maybe they're more tired, but the game doesn't say that's why he did it this way. I guess you could infer it, it's not that crazy, but it does feel really unnecessarily complicated, because he also just gives Kiku back anyway and says, yeah, look, you guys can all go as long as I get to duel Atsu, which she was absolutely going to do anyway. I don't say this as a real, genuine criticism of the writing, but the more I think about it as a plan, the more it leaves me a bit confused, and it feels like it happened this way just so that Oyuki and Jubei could be close by for the fight. The fight itself is a tremendous sequence. I think the first phase is engaging and tests your ability to be able to juggle everything you've learned, and genuinely is probably far superior to Kutenkan. I think switching between all of your weapons, adapting to his various movesets, stringing in tools, and just learning that whole fight was genuinely very, very fun, and actually might have been the hardest fight I had in the game. For most people, their toughest fight was probably Takezo, but I think Saito took me longer, and part of that comes from phase number 2. Transitioning from phase 1 to 2 has this cool little cinematic sequence where you're disarmed. Jubei comes to help you and you head to your sword and fight together, this time under the pretense of protecting those you love instead of fighting out of spite or malice. And during this fight, Jubei is cut down, which we will discuss in just a minute. Starting phase 2, Atsu is obviously consumed by rage once again. That feeling she felt when her family was killed, when she mourned her brother years ago, fills her up. The battlefield is covered in fire and smoke, and she fights with that. The phase begins with a string of attacks that once you get down feels fantastic to deflect this onslaught of flurries, but one of them is an uncounterable disarm move. Now this is a little controversial because the game breaks from its conventions here. Across the game you can always counter these. If you hold triangle and release at the right time, no matter how tight, they are counterable. This one isn't, and at first that may be a little frustrating, but the reason it's done is for experiential value that I think twists the mechanics of the game to create synergy between the player and Atsu. Atsu cannot disarm Saito while she's filled with the same rage that he is filled with. Only by the end of the fight, when she hears Jubei in her head, when he tells her to fight for the living, does Saito perform another disarm that you can counter. You send Saito's sword flying to the side, out of his hands, and cut him down as the fire clears, and Atsu finally finds herself at peace. She pins him to the same tree that she was pinned to as a child, and his final words, still tainted with spite, are "You are alone," as his life ebbs away. Jubei's death, I originally said in a commentary I did on Patreon, felt a little forced, and I think people have shared these sentiments, but I've since turned around on it. I think Jubei always had to die for the ending to hit. Atsu has to lose someone again, but this time she has to act differently, and who better than the brother she had already once mourned. This moment is acceptance of what happened, of who she is, and a stark contrast to how the loss of her family affected her when she was a child, and she pledges that Kiku will never be alone in Jubei's final moments. It would have been so easy for her to have done something like spare Saito now she's found a family, but the game has a different spin on an arc like this. Revenge is harmful, it's pain turned into violence, but that doesn't mean fighting is always bad. The fight against Saito and the Yōtei Six was always right, but the internal motivation and reason for doing so is what was wrong. Yōtei is not a battle of ideology like Tsushima was. It's far, far more a personal and internal struggle about purpose and life and trauma and, at its heart, family and love. Atsu pledged her life to killing because she loved her family so much, and they were taken. She ends up killing Saito and giving up the Onryo in favor of peace for the same reason. When she steps away from her brother's body and embraces Kiku, a scared girl crying for the father that she lost in the home where she'd lost the same, it punctuates this entire journey so beautifully, and I adore it. I think it adds depth to replays because of how you can see the love peering through the darkness of her hatred, and how every motivation is guided by that love, and how in the end, that wins out. I think it's a wonderful personal story about overcoming interpersonal trauma, and how even when you think someone is gone, they really aren't. They're always with you, and Jubei is a literal manifestation of that, in many ways a ghost too, but in the complete opposite way to how Atsu was an Onryo. He's the spirit that kept her going and gave her life again. Where Jin walks away at the end of Tsushima's ghost ending, consumed by that symbol, abandoning the idea of the Jin Sakai he was forced to be to embrace his true nature for the greater good, Atsu walks away in not the opposite direction but an adjacent one, finally understanding who Atsu is, and that she doesn't need to be the ghost she was forced to be, and there is always a reason to live. I think Yōtei is a game that goes in a different direction than I anticipated, and a different direction entirely than Tsushima, and sometimes that causes issues. When the game forgoes a lot of commentary established by Tsushima, even when directly relevant, it can feel shallow in areas Tsushima was very tactful in. But how it tackles its personal story, how it contextualizes it as a part of the living world you're moving through, I think is far more sophisticated than Tsushima ever was, and I'm not sure a lot of people are going to truly appreciate that about it because of how much broader in scope Tsushima was. It's not perfect, and it has a whole slew of issues, both in terms of writing and pacing, not to mention the chapter structure and non-linearity we discussed, but manages to stick an emotional landing despite that, and was a game that, bizarrely, in this modern age, held my attention mechanically throughout. I find as more time passes, the less traditional AAA games can do for me, and the fact Yōtei did, and left me only wanting more, is pretty fucking wild. Tsushima's biggest flaw was that it got exhausting by the end. You're ready for it to be over, but with Yōtei, it's so much better at balancing its stuff, and it leaves you with an admiration and a longing to return to its sprawling world in a way Tsushima only managed in its first act. I can't say I'm pining for a Ghost 3, but I am interested to see where they could take it. I think Yōtei proves you can kind of do more than you think, and I'd be interested to see them get more modern, take some major risks, to switch up how to explore the idea of Ghost. I'm not necessarily saying we need a Ghost of Tokyo set in 2025, but I'm also not saying that we shouldn't, because I do think straying even further from Tsushima's foundations can actually benefit a third game. Do something really different. Give us something we don't really expect, because Yōtei could have been the safest game of all time, and look, in many ways, it still is. But there are plenty of ways that it isn't, and those are the parts that compelled me the most. Yōtei is not a genre-defining game that will forever alter the landscape of open-world games, but it is really fucking good. Thanks for watching. This video has taken me so much longer than I meant for it to, but I hope you enjoyed. I said at the start of the year that I was going to spend some time finishing up projects, so Kingdom Come and Ghost of Yōtei, and I didn't mean for it to take quite this long, like we are in May now, but, you know, it is what it is, and I'm done it, and I'm glad they're out. So I hope that it was well worth it. Thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Like I always say, I could not be doing this still without you. You are keeping the monitors on, as it were. And speaking of Patreon, if you're interested in a little bit more, I did a video on Ghost of Yōtei Legends over there. It's not the most in-depth thing of all time, but neither is Ghost of Yotei Legends. It was a fun little one to put together, and I enjoyed writing it and editing it. It might also be the shortest video I've made in over half a decade. Who knows? I haven't checked, but I think it could be. And of course, over there's plenty of more stuff always going up. I've got an insane back catalogue of things. And hey, if you're interested in hearing what I have to say about Black Flag Resyncs, it's over there too. A big thank you as well to, of course, all of my Patreon producers and master assassins. We've got Arenathon, Callum Theftmus Kelly, Damien, the Not So Orange Gnome, Dink, Geek Fan, Luke Pierce, Renars Neretz. Oh, that's a new gamer. Thank you very much for your producer pledge, buddy. I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but I appreciate you nonetheless. Feel free to correct me on Patreon. Roland's, Super Doctor, Tyler Half, and Zedda. Thank you all so much, my gamers, for continuing to support me at such a high tier. You bring a tear to my eye. I couldn't do it without ya. I don't know why I'm saying this in such a inauthentic way. I mean it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just... Sorry, I think I got distracted by the recording button. I thought I was just, like, kind of glancing to try and check if it was actually recording. It is. So sorry for fucking botching that. Thank you, guys. And yeah, I don't know, that's it. I can start working on other projects now. The big one, the next main big project will be Assassin's Creed 3. So, yeah, I'm going to be locking into the books. I'm going to be doing the behind-the-scenes video for Patreon. I'm going to be playing the game. It's going to be bloody great. I've recently been playing the Assassin's Creed games through. I started playing AC1 just a couple of days ago. I've almost finished it now. The reason being, I wanted them fresh in my mind going into AC3, because AC3 is the culmination of a saga. It's, you know, the narrative culmination of Desmond's story, and so I didn't want to just be making a video and writing about AC3 in a vacuum. I wanted to be writing about AC3 as what it is, the final game in the Desmond saga. And I think that's important. That's important context. But also, I will be writing about the game in a vacuum as well, like things that AC3 does that I think are good about AC3, because it's a video game and that's what it does. But also, I think it's important to contrast with the games that came before it, and what it was being a combination too. I just think that's important. So I didn't want to just, you know, forget that aspect. I wanted it all fresh in my mind, and not just like information-wise, because I know there's games like the back of my hand. It's more like the feeling. I want to feel AC1 and the Ezio trilogy, so that when I go into AC3, I like that feeling of like how much I love those games is so fresh in my mind, so that I can tackle AC3 from that perspective. But also, I think it's going to be really fun going in with fresh eyes too, because I haven't played Assassin's Creed 3 through properly in, I think, since it came out. Like I've played it through a bunch of fucking times, like before Black Flag came out, before Unity came out, before Syndicate came out. I think I streamed them all, and before Origins came out. And you know, since then I've streamed it a bunch of times. I've made a bunch of Let's Plays too, and you know, all of that. I've played AC3 tons. But I think the only time I've ever sat down and just played AC3 to like absorb it and play AC3 is the first time it ever came out. And the game disappointed me so much that every playthrough after that was either a joke or a stream or, you know, whatever. I was never playing it just because I was like, I really want to absorb this game and take it seriously and, you know, give it a fair crack. And I'm looking forward to doing that. So I think it's going to be fun. It's going to make for a good video. But before that, I have a few smaller things that I'm working on that I think will be out before AC3, because AC3 is such a big one. It's going to take a long time. Originally, I did want to get the AC3 one out on July the 4th, because I thought that'd be quite a little funny date to get it out on. It'd be fitting. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do that anymore. And also, that would just be too close to Black Flag Resynced, and I think that would be a poor time to release an AC3 video, because everyone's going to be, you know, playing AC4 Resynced. They're going to be watching videos about AC4. They're going to be talking about AC4. For me to just drop an AC3 video is going to be like, I think it'll just get lost. I think people will be like, I don't care about that right now. Like, I'm kind of hyper-fixated on Black Flag. So, I think it probably just makes sense to leave it a bit, and, you know, to come out in, August or something. Who knows? And then also, this year I played through every Resident Evil game, just in my own time, just played through all of them, and I mean all of them, so that when I played Requiem, I kind of, like, you know, had the experience. I don't know, I probably have autism, I don't know, but that was so much fun. I absolutely love playing through every Resident Evil, and I think what I would like to do is a tier list / ranking of every Resident Evil game. I want to post this to the main channel as well, and it won't just be like a casual, like I'm sitting there doing a tier list. It'll be a proper written, you know, video, an edited video, but it'll be like the context, it'll be through the framing of a tier list. It's kind of just an excuse so that I can write mini essays on every Resident Evil game, and sort of talk about them and compare them with each other and stuff. I think that'll be a ton of fun. But yeah, that's it, I think. There might be some other things that happen between now and the E3 video as well. A few little pieces and bits here and there. Yeah, and obviously Patreon. I'm always posting on Patreon. So much fucking stuff on Patreon. And for anyone who does just want the companion videos, I now do have a Vault Lite tier. So for just $2 a month, you don't get like every single post I do or every single video I do, but you do get access to all of the companion videos. So every time I post a main video, you get access to the companion video on Patreon. And also, I've decided that, not for every video, but if I ever edit all of the audio first, I did this for Yōtei, often I'll edit like bits of video and bits of audio, but if I am ever at a point where I've finished all of the audio, then I'll render that out and throw that on the Vault Lite tier, so you can just have a listen to the audio version if you want to. So like with Yōtei, everyone at Vault Lite could just listen to the whole video in its entirety, just without visuals. And that was a couple weeks ago, so if that takes your fancy, then give that a little look if you feel like it. Thank you for watching, and I hope that next video won't be so long. It won't be so long of a wait for the next one. Hopefully. We'll see. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.